So I cannot believe how lucky I am today. Obviously, it's just a childhood dream. I'm here with Bob James today. I'm still a bit giddy about all this, so you'll have to...
I'll excuse you, don't worry. I'll help you through.
Well, it's for me, we'll talk about it in a bit, but passion for angling, massive part of my childhood. You as an angler up there with, obviously, you and John Wilson. That's all I watched growing up, so I cannot thank you enough for letting us come down today and speak to you.
You'd be fine, because actually we're just quite ordinary blokes who go fishing, so just chill.
Yeah. But what the reason for today is, obviously, I know you've spoke quite a lot about your passion videos and the things that you've done in your past, but I just thought it'd be interesting, and from the feedback I've got, that I'd like to have an interview with you. You're talking about your life and fishing and your past achievements. So here we are, lovely cup of tea in your little patch of heaven.
It certainly is, yeah.
Very impressive. Just tell us a bit about where we are today.
You're about half a mile from the bank of the River Wye, which is now my favourite river. It's kind of moved around over the years. I suppose as a child, or certainly as a teenager, the Hampshire Raven was the absolute be-all and end-all. Sadly, it's not anymore. And I've sort of progressed and moved off. It's too busy down the south now as well. I've almost become a sort of northerner, haven't I?
Well, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. So you've got your little pocket of heaven. So just really appropriate. I thought that we do it down here and we have a proper chat about
welcome.
Bob James. So with that, tell me about young Bob. Tell me about where you were born, your parents, any siblings. Just tell me about young Bob.
Well, that's pretty simple, really. There's just young Bob. There's no brothers or sisters.
Right.
I'm not sure that's an advantage or a disadvantage. I've had long discussions with other people about it, but it kind of suited me. I was born in Chelsea.
I didn't know that.
No, I know. I don't think most people think of me as a bit more countryside than that.
Yes, definitely.
But no, Chelsea. And then we moved out to around the Wimbledon area, which suited me well because there's a very nice fishing lake there. And some ponds on Wimbledon Common, Richmond Park, places that were great adventures to me. As soon as I got a push bike, I was gone, Nobody in my family fished, oddly enough.
Wow.
I didn't even know anybody at that point who went fishing. So why I wanted to go fishing is almost a bit of a mystery, really. The nearest thing we can sort of tie it down to is my mother and then occasionally my auntie Joan would take me in my pushchair to Wimbledon Park Lake, which was the nearest piece of water. And apparently I always was requested, go to the lake. And then my Auntie Joan, bless her, had bought me a little model train, tiny little thing in a little box, on the way up to the lake. And there's the one part where there's the public part of the lake, and then there's a fence, and it's the golf course all the way around the rest of the lake and the fishing. And you always used to get a couple of guys sat in this corner, just the other side of this sort of railing fence, fishing. And apparently I just used to want to sit there for hours in my pushchair, just watching it.
A fascination with it.
And I think it was, typical sort of London, lake. It was sort of pea green suit colour, and the beautiful little orange floats out there. I think absolutely loved it. And then because suddenly this magic would happen, because suddenly the float would go under and out would come this fish. So I sat apparently on this particular day watching, quite intrigued, and I said to my Auntie Joan, he hasn't thrown anything in. And she just sort of looked at me and thought, what's he on about? So I chucked my little train in by the float.
I bet that went down well.
Well, I think I got into my psyche. I'd seen the guys that were catching because they'd always put their float out and then they'd put their little balls of ground bait in, which I know now, but clearly at that age, I didn't. I just had made this strange association that you put your float in and you threw something next to it. So I chucked the train in. And that seems to be, general sense to be in my family, where there's fascination, where I hooked into it. Sorry for the pun. But,
No, from being down on the water's edge then. So I didn't know that either. I would have thought there would have been like a grandfather figure or a father that's just... So just naturally you just decided that... No.
Yeah, and my father was great. He took me down to a little ex-army store to buy your fishing tackle. You didn't have many of the proper big fishing stores then. You got a tank aerial, which most of my generation started off on, and a little brown Baker-like reel, about this big, and some floats, which invariably were those lovely sort of perch bobbers. And then the guy said, do you want any line to go on that then? I said, yeah, smashing, I've been needing some line to put on it. And he said, what breaking chain do you want? And apparently I said £44. So
optimistic from the beginning?
He said, £44. And I said, I want to catch a carp, and the record carp's £44. So my little brain, at that age, I thought I needed £44 line. Fortunately, sadly, we don't have any that strong.
And what age do you think you were then?
About 7.
So that's what got you into it. That you're just such a young age, you just decided that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And can you remember the first venue that you fished?
Yeah, it's just off the Hogs back in the Farnham Angling Club lake called Cut Mill, which actually became quite a famous carp fishery and it came back into my life as a carp fishery later on. And I can't remember what breaking train this guy finally sold me, but if you put too thick a line around a little thing, it comes off an old telephone lead. Well, it's to say, so I got this reel on this line, and I got my worm, and I got my little float, and I put my coat on the floor as it demonstrates you should do Mr. Crabtree Goes Fishing, which that was my Bible. So I pulled the line off onto the coat, and I've cast it out, but it's so stiff, the coils in this line, the float keeps coming back towards me, and I'm saying to my dad, look, my float won't stay out there. But by pure chance, I'd invented a new method, which never caught on, I have to say, because I was casting this out and my worm was slowly coming back as this coils of line was slowly going like this. Needless to say, a little perch grabbed hold of it, and under it went, and
off you are.
Easy as that,
So, because my first fish was a perch on a canal, so I think most people...
They're so greedy, aren't they?
Yeah. But mine was up Mount Cop in Stoke-on-Trent. There's like a little stretch of canal there, but it was definitely a perch, so I think a lot of people's fish was a perch, but something that you'll always remember. Yeah,
well, the thing is, they feed them top, bottom anyway, don't they? And anything that moves, they grab it. So they were relatively easy for us novices.
So you had an understanding dad then, if he was taking you fishing?
If
you were anything like me, I presume you were wanted to get out all the time, were you?
Yeah, quite luckily, my father used to take my mum out to shopping somewhere. I mean, places you probably went, like Guildford and Farnham, around that area. So then I started finding places. There was a little fishing book came out. I think it was called New Fishing for Londoners or something. And it was a little dating guide. And most of them, ironically, belonged to the Farnham Club. So they used to take me out, drop me off, and they'd disappear for the day and come back, which most of the time was great. But it did go wrong occasionally. On one particular occasion, they dropped me at a place called Stockbridge Pond. And it got there, and it was beautiful because the water was completely calm, and my school pal Graham used to come with me. Oh, this is really nice. Off they went. We got our fishing tackle out, set it all up and cast out. Only for our ledges to go boing, 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 bounce across the surface. It was frozen. So we're there for the rest of the day now.
Bloody hell. So, I mean, did you... obviously, when you started going out with your dad and that, I mean, you were at school then as well. So, did you get any friends into it as well? Did you have multiple people coming down with you? Or?
Yeah, a couple of things came in that sort of helped the whole thing. There was a kid at school called Alan Golding, and then they were catching tench, big tench, like 5-pounders, which was big in those days. I was catching little 2.5-pounders. So they happily told me where it was. It was a place called the Bugle Inn, which is out by Heathrow Airport.
Is it still going? Or?
I think so. So I cycled all the way out to this place. It was quite a way. And when I got there were the sort of planes coming in and out of Heathrow Airport, and they were still digging it round one side. And this was everything that my childhood dream of fishing was not.
Yeah.
I was old estate lakes and so on. So I cycled around and found them, and his dad said, well, are you going to fish? I said, I don't know, I'll have another look round. So I went all the way around this pit again, and I came back, and he said, you decided where you're going to fish? And I said, yes, Hampton Court Park. He said, well, you're not going to fish here? I said, no, I don't like it here. He said, but they're really big tension here. I said, no, that's not what it's about. I'm going to go and catch my 2.5-pounders in the absolute peace and solitude of Hampton Court Park. So even from that little age, when I was first allowed to run a bike, I had this romantic
idea of fishing.
Yeah, it wasn't fish at all costs. It was always a whole package had to kind of fit together. And that's just kind of stayed with me. I'm still the same.
I was going to say, from what we know of you in later life, that's always been an important part of your fishing, hasn't it?
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
So still talking about young Bob, because we all have fads when we're kids, as we know. Mine was skateboarding, by the way. I thought I'd be good at that. It lasted about a week.
I was a bit before that.
Yeah, well, obviously, you wouldn't believe it, but I was skinnier then, so I could just about get away with it. But I don't think it'd be able to hold me now. But at what point did it become like... Because with fishing, for me, at a young age, it consumed me. It really did consume me. I still say now that it was like fishing's a hobby, isn't it? Then it's an addiction.
Yes.
Then it's a habit, and then it's a disease. That's the
Or
way I
even
feel
worse,
about it.
it becomes a way of life.
Yeah. It's the way it is. I mean, so can you remember at what point you thought, "Wow, this is going to be stuck with me for life. This is something that's going to consume me"?
I don't know. That's an interesting point. The other influence that came into my life, which I was very, very fortunate for, was a chap called Harvey Ellingham, who was the editor of the local newspaper. And I discovered he went fishing. So I used to go knock on his door, sit and drink cups of tea with him, chat fishing, pick his brains. And he fished with a chap called Maurice Wigan, who I later realised, later in life, wrote fishing books. And indeed wrote one of Chris Yates and I's favourite ever fishing book. So I was lucky enough to meet this man at 11 years old.
Wow.
Because Harvey Ellingham very kindly had said, if you pass your 11 plus, I'll take you carp fishing.
What an incentive that is, isn't it?
Yeah, so Harvey took me carp fishing, and he took me carp fishing with his fishing mate, which is Maurice Wigan, who in his day was actually quite a famous fisherman. In fact, a lot of the old school still, hold him in great esteem. So and I was sort of taken off to a proper carp lake and given a proper carp, borrowed a proper carp rod and so on at 11 years old, and caught an 8-pound, 7-ounce carp.
How old?
11.
That's quite a big fish, isn't it? I mean, I didn't catch a fish like that for quite a while. Because, you just don't, do you?
No, well, not you're very lucky.
Well, you were, especially with that kind
of...
Well,
I was very lucky and continue to be so, I have to say. I've always been lucky.
So, Bob going to school, how did that go on, and how did it take up your valuable fishing time? Because if you were anything like me again, it's all I wanted to do was to hear that bell go and get on my push bike and go fishing. Yeah,
that's, I think... probably pretty well such as sort of most of us at that age. There were advantages of school though, because I was doing engineering. I mean, I've skipped past primary school now. I think, I was skipped to 11, so we kind of got past that bit. But it's okay then, you see, because then I was doing engineering. Unfortunately, my engineering teacher, Eddie Tomlinson, was a fisherman. So I started making landing nets and rod rests in my engineering class. Wasn't on the agenda at all. But he, you can make that, son. So I quite like that part of it. But then there did come the time, and I can still feel the time, still feel the day. couldn't tell you exactly when it was. When I always used to make sure I sat by the window so I could sit out and look out the window and sort of daydream about seeing somewhere else. And it suddenly dawned on me, how do I not be here? How do I get out of here? Well, it's quite simple, don't go in. And after a little while, they seem to kind of not notice that you're not there.
So you used to just, as we call it, bunking off school just to go fishing?
Yeah.
Well, it's done you no harm, hasn't it? To be, not that we're giving that as an incentive to
No, it's not the right way to do it. But and so we used to get a train. You could get an early train from Putney to Hampton Court and go tench fishing.
With all your tackle?
Yeah, with what tackle we had then. It wasn't a sort of huge amount. And that's when I realised that I didn't like beer. Because we got to the station one morning, I don't know, we were probably about 14 by now.
I was going to say, I presume we're not talking about 11-year-old Bobby here.
No, we got up to about 14 now. We'd come up from the station, there was a lovely little baker's, so we'd buy a nice new fresh loaf of bread. And then we wanted something to drink with it. And they just brought out Long Life beer. You got, I think it was 4 in the little thing. So we thought, we'll try some of that, So we got down to the lake and it was a red hot day. So we sat there eating the bread, because we can't ask our mum for sandwiches, can we? Because we're supposed to be eating a school dinner at school.
Yeah.
So we're eating the bread, which is lovely, fresh bread and now we started drinking this Long Life beer. Well, of course, pouring beer on warm bread in your tummy, baking hot day.
Especially at 14.
Yeah, it got to, I don't know, about 11 o'clock, and both of us are going, God, I've got a stonking headache. And I feel I'm going to give birth, And we didn't feel very well on this, to be honest with you. And so we didn't do that again. Well, not the beer drinking, we did all the other bit again.
Yeah.
And then probably only about a year later, I was on holiday with my dad, and we went in the pub, and he said, would you like to try some beer? And I said, no, thanks, not for me. And he said, why? And I said, I don't like it. And he said, oh, have you tried beer then? No, I just know I'm not going to like it. I'd already kind of blown it, really.
I was going to say, he probably knew, because
I'm sure he was wise enough to work that bit out.
So obviously we've got you fishing. Obviously you're already bunking off school, so we know it's an important part.
Yeah.
made you go down the route that you did? Obviously, we know you as Bob James' specimen angler, and obviously from passion, and predominantly as a very good, obviously all-round angler. But did you ever think about going down the match route? Did you ever enter into the matches? I mean, what made you go down that route?
Well, I think earlier on, Graham and I joined a fishing club because they had coach outings every other Friday. Every other Sunday, and went off to sort of exotic places. I can particularly remember we went off to one in Kent, which was called Pluck's Gutter.
Pluck's
Gutter.
Sounds
and there was
lovely.
another one, I think it was called Dimsdale's Sewer.
Right, these all sound lovely places.
They do, don't they? But apparently down in Kent, where they drained all the marshes, these were the names of the various little drains and so on.
Right.
They weren't like we thought up in London as sewage. But the novelty was great because you went off on this coach to distant places, and you met all these other old boys who went fishing. Most of them because smoked horrible, stinky little roll-ups, and then there'd be crates of ale all the way down the middle aisle of the coach to be consumed on the way back. And most of them were really not much better than I was. But there was one old chap who always used to sort of weigh in, always used to feature. So I decided I'd go and watch him. And this particular trip, I sort of found where he was fishing and sort of moved fairly close and watched him. And he came round about lunchtime. He said, "Oh, young James," he said, "why did you decide to pitch up next to me then, watch me?" And I said, "Well, Charlie, you always frame, Oh, he said, "And how do you think I'll do that?" I said, "Well, to be honest, I don't know, because I've been watching you." And I said, "To be honest, Charlie, you're not doing anything the rest of us aren't really, are we?" He said, "No," but he said, "I'm the scalesman, aren't I?" So I know you're getting ahead of yourself.
Right.
And so I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, what you have to bear in mind now is obviously it's a big age difference here. Was when we fished matches in those days, they were called rovers. You picked your number out of the hat, and then you all went off as your number came up. But you all had to come back to this central point to have your fish weighed, and the scalesman was his spot." Okay, so we've got that. So, there's blokes with canvas buckets full of bream coming from half a mile up that way, and blokes with two chub in a canvas bucket coming from half a mile down that way.
Wow, so you'd carry him to one point?
Yeah. And when you look back on it, I mean, it was not right, was it, really?
No, I didn't even know that happened.
Yeah, that's exactly how it was done. And Charlie's philosophy was that, bear in mind these were on London Anglers Association waters, which were quite busy. It was a big club, the LA, those days. So all these different fish, day after day, keep coming back to this spot to get weighed. And I can't use Charlie's exact words, but he said, eventually, half of them just go, I think I'll just stay here. And because he was right.
Yeah.
And a certain percentage of these fish kept getting fetched back to this spot, just stayed there.
Became their home.
And he knew, because he was a scoutsman, where that spot was. So that's where he always sat.
That's not a bad idea, is it?
No, I mean, I used it to great effect sort of later in life as well, funnily enough, and totally different circumstances. But it's another one of those little things in fishing. You're always looking for this answer that someone else has got that you haven't, and that was an early one for me. Yes.
Did he continue to win?
He always framed. He didn't necessarily win because he wasn't the great angler. Sometimes someone who was a better angler than him would be on a good peg. But it was just interesting that obviously there was this little resident fish population in the end that was always where the scales went.
It's a good plan. I'm not quite so sure it'd work today, though, would it?
No.
I can't imagine like the likes of Jamie Hughes carrying 200 pound down the banks. No. I think there'd be a few grumbles. But at what point for you did it become? Did you decide that, listen, this match fishing, yes, I appreciate it, but it's not for me? I mean, did you actually ever enter any at all, or did?
Yeah. Well, you kind of naturally were. If you went on these club things, it was a fishing match. That was it. But
it didn't, the bug for you, because for me, I'm completely different. I don't really do very well pleasure fishing. Pleasure fishing, I think it's a brilliant idea till I'm on the bank, and then I'm like, after 2 hours, I'm like, right, what's for tea?
I think there's 2 points to that one. The first trophy I ever won in the fishing club, they kind of gave me, because they liked the way I handled the fish.
Fish handling trophy.
Yeah, which had never been, didn't exist before. And then the other problem I had was I don't like putting fish in keep nets.
Right, yeah.
It just really goes against it with me.
Yeah.
So, that kind of was half of it. And then I guess the other half of it was I was really into the fishing books around then. there were so many wonderful fishing books written sort of between the wars and just after the war. Venables and BB and obviously Richard Walker and so on. And obviously I got a huge amount of inspiration from that, not just to go fishing, but just to want to know more about the countryside. Well, there's not really that in match fishing. The only book I had in match fishing was the Encyclopedia of Fluke Fishing by Billy Lane,
Right.
who was one of my fishing heroes, and who fortunately I did get to meet, because I loved it, because he wore a shirt and tie.
Yeah.
When he was match fishing, and he float fished. He didn't just plosh the ledger out there or all this like everybody else was doing. So that's really where that sort of comes from. It's a whole sort of package of things. I liked the idea at times, and I still have, and I'm sure it's something we'll get into more as we go along, of actually being put under pressure to catch fish. Whereas a lot of people hate. I actually quite like that, because I'm not one of these people who says, being down the river is just an excuse. It's not. If I go down the river, it's because I've gone down there to catch fish. If I just want to go down the river, I don't carry my fishing tackle.
Well, see, that's interesting, because that's kind of a matchman's mentality, isn't it?
Yeah.
But obviously from a more pleasure angling, specimen angling's point of view. So.
And a lot of my methods have been influenced by match anglers, not specimen hunters. I'm not a patient fisherman.
Right. Because that's obviously naive of me, but I always think that obviously these guys that go carp fishing or barbel fishing, it's about, let's just have a nice evening out, or sit below the stars under the bivvies or whatever they decide to use. But no, it's interesting that you've got that
I'm a bit of a
match
mixture.
mentality.
I'm a bit of a mixture in that.
Yeah. So
There's too much. I've heard too much, excuses, and pardon my English, for sort of bullshit, and some of the sort of messy blokes, because with the match fishing, well, it's black and white, isn't it? You can't make it up, you can't cheat it.
No,
I quite like that aspect of it, you see. So I'm a bit of a mixture. I'm a bit of a hybrid.
Maybe you're a match angler at heart.
Yeah, a bit late now, but yeah.
Never too old, never too old. So we've obviously got Bob going through school. You've left school. What was next? What was your job? What was your first job? And tell us about that stage of your life.
I didn't have a job very long.
I'm not surprised. You never went to school.
No, I actually did. It's not quite as dramatic as it sounds.
Too busy fishing.
But I've basically just been lucky, and I've earned a living out of my hobbies, really.
That's what we're gonna come on to, like, so. But when you left the school originally, you just.
And I actually I went to work for London Transport.
Okay.
As a mechanic, as a mechanical engineer, and they sent me to college, which my dad was very pleased about, because they all want you to have some sort of qualification, don't they? Because they didn't most of the time. So
what was the parent? What I mean, obviously, because it must have gone on in the house saying, "What do you want to do, Bob?" And
I hadn't got a clue.
Did you say to him that you were? I'm just going to try and wing it and do my hobby for the rest of my life.
No,
just wonder what the.
I don't think I knew that at the time. I think it's quite interesting in a way, because your last thing asking me about the match fishing and asking me about this one, I think they actually joined in the middle. I was just naturally. I wasn't a rebel. I didn't want to change things or change the world, but I didn't want to be told what to do.
Yeah.
So I don't like match fishing, because I don't want someone else choosing my spot for a start.
Yeah, picking the pegs.
And I didn't really particularly want to, go to school, or for that matter go to work, because I didn't want someone else telling me how to do it. And I don't mean that in a big-headed or arrogant sort of way.
No, just do what you wanted.
That's just my spirit. That's just the way that I am. So that kind of ruled out match fishing in work.
Yeah, definitely. But like I said, it's really interesting, because you've got that element of it when you're saying that you want to succeed, you want to catch fish, you're a busy angler.
Yeah.
But then you've also got the I won't do as I'm told, or have my peg drawn for me. So
but then equally you get other elements come into. Other huge elements of coming into my life, as I suspect you probably did. One of course was called hormones.
Yeah, definitely.
Suddenly I couldn't get everything out of fishing that I wanted. And
the ear and the ladies kind of ruined it for me, because like I said, I fished up until I was 17. And then I only started fishing again like 2.5 years ago.
Yeah,
so
well, that seems perfectly healthy, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, well,
that's absolutely fine. And then the other one, of course, around that sort of period, I'd kind of grown up with John Wayne and Elvis Presley, the sort of quite macho-y sort of thing. And then, of course, around the time I was leaving school was the mid-'60s, so Chelsea, where I'd been born from, suddenly is the centre of the entire universe, as is British pop music. So, because everybody wanted to be a musician.
Yeah.
Well, I think an awful lot I did anyway. So, that was the next thing. I thought, yeah, I'll have a bit of that.
So,
I tried that.
tell us about that then. How, Bob James, the musician. What went on there? So
It unfortunately never really sort of blossomed to anything great. It did put me in the world of a lot of people, some of whom I still know, some of that unfortunately are dead now, who did very, very well at it. There's an awful lot of musicians who went fishing, an awful lot. So that was quite fascinating. Mine had really come from when I was in the Scouts, or the Cubs. I think it was the Cubs, that's even younger, isn't it? And you used to have this little show every year, the gaming show, whatever it was called. So we decided we would do a skiffle group. Skiffle, by the way, was what came before rock and roll.
oh, what was it? Skiffle?
It was called skiffle, yeah.
Yeah, I've never heard of that either.
No, well, it was sort of pre-rock and roll. So we did. So I had a bass. You used to get a tea chest, a wooden tea chest,
Yep.
and a broom handle, and a bit of string, and you could make a bass out of it. Boom, 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 boom.
Are you winding me up? Because I've seen that on the films.
No, this is absolutely true. Tony Weston had a little snare drum. Maurice Martin could play the guitar, and John Billiard played the washboard, where you had little thimbles on your fingers and played the washboard. So we had this thing called the Station Boys. So we went and did this Cub show, and performing, I think, there's several things in performing, probably like there is in lots of things. Obviously there's a satisfaction to doing it, there's a love of it, but there's also having an audience love you is quite an addiction.
Yeah.
It's almost a drug. And so we did, because all the other kids were reciting a bit of Byron or tying the sheep shank knot, and we came on and did Hang Down the Head, Tom Dooley and Rock and London, because everyone went mad. So we kind of went, whoa, this is quite good, we quite like this, particularly because the girls like it.
Well, yeah, definitely. Obviously, I think that's a big determining factor in most young lads' life, isn't it?
Yeah. So suddenly, that kind of grew a bit, and I got involved in one or two other bands, and as I say, met some really nice people in it. Unfortunately, never sort of made the charts or anything.
We all have that dream, though, don't we?
That.
I was going to be the next Bon Jovi when I was a kid, definitely. But obviously,
it. But then equally, as life went on, I realised that my musician friends were as fanatic about their music as I was about my fishing. It was 24/7 in their head. They'd be practising every day, whether they were playing or not, and so on. And I was nowhere near that dedicated to the music bit. And I just wanted the nice bit.
Yeah.
I just wanted to turn up for the gig.
And the money. But we'll come back to that, because I've got questions about later Bob, later on. But you've already touched on it a little bit. But going back, obviously you mentioned Billy, but back then, so young Bob, where did you get your information from about fishing? Because obviously now social media, we've got that. But back then, and like you've already said that reading a book was a big part of your life. But if you wanted to get some information about how somewhere was fishing, or where did you get that from? And also, I know you've already mentioned it, but who were the kind of influences back then that were important to you with your fishing?
Well, I guess the nearest thing you had to anything like that was the Angling Times.
Yep.
So obviously you would pick up on Richard Walker. Obviously was probably the sort of biggest name through that period. And then you had the lovely guys like Peter Stone was one of the nicest people I ever went fishing with, who was part of that sort of Richard Walker sort of school of angling. But he was just such fun and such a lovely guy to go fishing with. But as regards to this thing of what venues are fishing, right? You didn't have that. So you just went. You just went to somewhere because it's somewhere you'd always wanted to fish, or maybe because someone else had said, "Oh, I went to the old mill on Aldermaston the other day and had a bag full of barbel." You'd think, "Oh, smash, I'll have some of that." But it was nothing more up to date than that. You had no sort of daily things to find out whether.
So it was like an old-fashioned grapevine, so to speak.
Yeah,
at
best you had a grapevine. But then, still that early on in my fishing, obviously, my grapevine wasn't exactly sort of huge.
You didn't have a big network back then.
No, I mean, after those sort of times, the British Carp Society came along, and then the Carp Society, and then all these different organisations. None of those existed back then.
Right.
It wasn't as anywhere near as specialised or specialist as you might imagine back then. It was all pretty.
I think that's what we take for granted now. I like, because obviously it was a long time before me, and it's so easy now. You see obviously the youngsters coming through from such a young age, but back then it's completely different, wasn't it?
Absolutely,
I think that's what's important.
There was virtually no specialist fishing tackle.
Yeah.
I mean, when we started carp fishing, let's just pick on that one, because it's the popular one. We used potatoes for bait.
Right.
Now, why the hell would a carp would eat a potato? I haven't got a clue. But someone had come up with this idea that you use potatoes because carp populations in lakes in those days were very low generally, very few fish. But the lake would probably be teeming with rudd and tench. So you couldn't fish with bread and things like that because it all just got nibbled down however big a bit you started. Yeah. So someone had come up with the idea, well, you put a potato in because nothing else is going to eat it.
Was there sweet corn around then? I mean, I know it was around there, but I mean, were people using it as a bait?
No. Years, decades later.
See, I'm totally out the know with that.
No, it doesn't matter. So, but then not only were we using these sort of potatoes, which we often had to throw out because the rod wasn't capable of casting it out, but then you put your line through it with a needle first and then tied the hook on and pulled the hook back into the bait.
Right.
So that made it pretty tricky.
Yeah.
But then bear in mind the hook would probably be like a size 2.
Big hook.
Which is, and would be really thick wire with a very blunt point on it really and a huge rank barb.
Yeah.
So that's got that bit so far, okay? Now we've got the lines coming back to me and I've got 10 foot of very floppy split cane.
Yeah.
And I've got a little electric bite alarm that's probably more likely to go off because the wind's changed direction than because I've got a fish on the end of my line. I mean, that would not be reliable. And you mustn't let the fish feel any resistance, allegedly in those days. So, we've got the bail arm open and a bit of silver paper or something hanging on the line to stop the wind blowing it away, and that's all that's going to move when you get this take.
Schoolboy's bite alarm, isn't it?
Now, this is a bad scenario, really, isn't it? This is not appealing to you one bit, is it, going out and doing this?
Not really.
No. And then the worst after all that is that then when I do get a take, I've got to pull this hook, this blunt great rank hook, through this potato with this very floppy rod to get a hook up.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, how we ever caught anything?
But you did.
I don't know.
But you did catch them, didn't you?
But that was back in the days when you did have to be patient, because that could take quite some time.
What I want to talk about now is, obviously, we've got you going through, and you're saying you left school, and
we sort of we hazed around that.
Yeah,
it was being a rock and roll star.
Yeah, we need to come back to that. Definitely, I definitely want to hear more about Rockstar Bob.
Obviously, wanting all the women in the world to.
And all the money.
No, enough. The money never came into it with me.
Oh, it did for me. That's all I wanted.
No, it never ever has. And then there was the fishing.
But the fishing's always been the prevalent thing. So
I don't know. I think there were times when it wasn't the sort of mainstay of my life. But
have you ever had a break from it? Have you ever had a break from it, so to speak? Like, have you ever put the stuff away and thought that might be it? It's always been there.
Yeah.
So at what point? This is what I'm just trying, because for me, there must have been a point when you thought something must have happened, or something where you thought, right, I can make a living out of this. I know you said that you've always just been lucky, but I don't believe that. There must have been something that Bob did that made it so that this is...
Yeah, it wasn't quite as straightforward as that. Because I've already said, I had this. I also had this always ever developing love for the whole of the countryside and everything that sort of went on in it. And in those days, fishing and shooting went pretty well hand in hand for a lot of people, and as did hunting.
Yeah.
I never had the ambition to hunt, but the shooting came in because eventually I'd grown a business out of my cars hobby, so I sold that and moved to Salisbury, or just below Salisbury, which was my sort of dream destination at the time, and I really wanted to get involved in the whole gamekeeping world and country estates and shooting and then because
as in become a gamekeeper.
No, I don't think so. I was quite happy to sort of remain my own little freelance, self-employed self.
Yeah.
But you get days you go picking up.
Yeah.
I was lovely two or three at one point, absolutely beautiful flat-coated retrievers, and I loved working the dogs. I'd never had a dog. And I'd always wanted a dog, but I'd always lived in town, so I never had. Now suddenly, I'd left town and I was living in the country. So I was living my dream, and the dogs were part of it. So a lot of the time, I would walk the river with the dogs because that would give me as much pleasure as going fishing, especially if I could watch fish. And I've always loved clear water fisheries where I can watch fish. I still do down here.
Yeah. I
love watching fish. So I then also started to get jobs on the river because I didn't have a job per se, so I was very lucky, and one of the river keepers down there, a lovely man called Mike Trowbridge, was very good to me. And sort of not so much took me under his wing, but I did a lot of jobs with him, and the estate would pay me as self-employed, and so on. So suddenly, I've got this huge world in front of me, which I just absolutely loved.
And you're living like the outside country style life there. And was this still down Chelsea way?
No. I've said I've moved to Salisbury at this point.
It's all the same to me. I'm sorry, I'm rubbish with directions.
Chelsea, Salisbury, that's about 100 miles difference.
If it's not on a sat nav, I'm terrible. I'm telling you. I know Stoke. That's about it. Stoke-on-Trent. I'm afraid that's about it. So you're living that life there, and obviously fishing's still a big part of your time. Well, if you're on the banks all the time.
I was writing for fishing magazines by then.
Oh, so we see. That's. So how did you get into that? How did that come about? Is that because were you starting to get well known within the fishing fraternity then? And what age were you about this?
I suppose that would have been in my very early 20s.
Yeah.
I'd written in quite a lot of fishing magazines by then. I've never written a fishing book. I've only ever contributed. I've contributed to quite a lot of fishing books, and I'd started to do the odd sort of talk at fishing events and stuff like that. So yeah, for those days, that was probably about as much as a sort of profile as you got, because we didn't have all this social media stuff.
Were you getting recognised though? I mean, were people recognising you from work like that?
It had got to a point where I lived down a little lane, and I could be in my little study at the front of the house here, and I'd see a little red Vauxhall go past, and then a few minutes later I'd see the same little red Vauxhall car go past, and the same little red Vauxhall car go past, and then I think, I must pop out, get the dogs to go out, and the little red Vauxhall car suddenly stopped and go, Christ, Bob James, I didn't know you lived here. And you think, no, that's all you just driven past 4 times.
Been sitting there waiting for you to come out.
Or, people would start trying to find where I was fishing. So, you had to hide your car or just drape something over it, so as they drove past it wasn't too obvious.
Because they'd be in your spot, or
they'd come and find you once they saw your car and work out where your fishing spots were.
I think that still happens today a lot as well.
I'm sure it does. Fortunately, it doesn't happen to me, because I'm very lucky. I'm going to live a much more private life, and the fishing's mine.
Yeah, they can't come down here.
No, they're not. No. So that had all sort of started to change in that respect. I'd done a little bit of work before I left London earlier on for a couple of fishing tackle companies, again on the sort of self-employed basis. So it was sort of built. It wasn't like a one-day thing.
Yeah.
But certainly when I left London, I was lucky. I was doing what a lot of people do now. I was downsizing.
Yeah.
I was selling a house in Barnes and a small business to go and buy a property somewhere where it was a quarter of the price.
So you were already on an upper stage at that point.
I almost thought I was going to retire. By the time I got to probably about my mid-30s, I was thinking, this is all going all right. Probably be retire. But then 3 divorces later.
Well, that was my next question. So the next question was, at what point were you there? Were you married? Did you have children? But obviously,
no, never
3 divorces might not be enough video camera memory for that one.
No, we don't need too much recall on that one. To be fair, the first one only lasted a year.
Yeah. Too much fishing.
Yeah, no, not quite. She was a smashing person, but she was a children's teacher, and then she wanted to learn to teach deaf children, and then she went to Ceylon, or Sri Lanka as it is now. In the meantime, I was doing a lot of fishing, and I'd started building my fishing thing. But the music thing had gone off on a funny angle, because a friend of mine, my old fishing mate, Graham, he'd started doing the music for fashion shows in London, where you just had 2 decks. And because as a young man, having the catwalk there and the changing room here with all these lovely models ripping all their kit off, and you're trying to pick out one album track at exactly the right moment for the next one to go on, so that was quite an exciting time.
I can see why you say now that you've been very lucky throughout your life. It's definitely panning out that way so far.
Yeah. So there was there's little deviations in these things. None of them were sort of cut and dry. But when I left London, I did kind of think, if I need, I don't know, to put it into something like modern figures, 50 grand a year to live, but I'm probably spending 25 of that on my hobbies.
Yeah.
So if I can go down there and earn 25 doing my hobbies,
it's no brainer.
What can be wrong?
Yeah.
So that was roughly more the thing than rather than wanting to be famous or.
Yeah, that just came, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't think there was. Well, I think with the music thing, obviously, there's always that element of wanting to be famous, but there certainly wasn't in the fishing thing.
Yeah. So would you say that you're an extrovert then? I think that we've got to be, haven't we? If we're doing like, there's elements. There's got to be within the fishing, like being in front of the camera and obviously wanting to. I definitely am.
Yeah, it's
I was
interesting.
definitely.
Well, I'm not actually sure that I know quite what the definition of an extrovert is. I like to be good at what I do, and I'm not shy.
Yeah.
But whether that actually makes me an extrovert, if somebody wants to kind of force themselves on the scene or whatever, I'm certainly not that.
I think obviously that there's both, isn't there? You need both. You need an extrovert and you need an introvert, and you need them both because the introverts obviously are supposed to come up with all the best ideas, and extroverts are the ones that go and say, "Actually, we'll do that. That's a brilliant idea." So
yeah.
But I'm definitely one, but not a very good one. Otherwise, I'd be sitting where you were.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but you've got plenty of time.
Yeah, I don't know about that. So, Bob, we spoke about early life, Bob, and it's only appropriate because I've seen that some of the stuff here that I'm obviously desperate to see. Talk me through some of your tackle. You bought your first fishing rod, haven't you?
Yeah. I've got my first fishing reel. Well, not my first. No, my first was the tank aerial. We talked about earlier with a little Bakelite reel. This was my first sort of proper centre pin, which is still nice. I still use it today. Every now and again, once a year, I take my first popper rod. My first
so what make would these be? Then?
This was made by a man called Clifford Constable in London, and you could buy the rod and then you could whip it because it saved money.
What do you mean? You can whip it yourself?
But whipping's on yourself. So that's what I did. I bought the rod.
Wait, it came with no eyes. You had to put all them on yourself.
Yeah, I mean it's been done again over the years, but I used to like doing that. Then do all the little intermediates.
I didn't realise that's what happened either. I had no idea that you had to whip your own eyes onto the rods.
You didn't have to.
But it would have cost you less.
Yeah. Some places offered it as you could buy the blanks as they call it.
Yeah.
And then you could buy a set of rings, or you could choose your own rings, and you could choose your own colour for the whippings, and you could because if you were egotistic, was I egotistic? I can't remember now. Extrovert. You could write your own name on it. But the irony with that is two ironies here. One, so the first sort of really nice centre pin that I ever had was my J.W. Young record breaker. Okay. I'm sure that the title sold it to me.
Yeah, but it's definitely an incentive to buy that reel, isn't it?
Then the years roll on, and then I get to I bet put it around the other way. Look, take the cameraman out. I get to put my name on some of the finest fishing rods I've ever seen.
I've got to be honest, because obviously I've been away from match fishing for so long and fishing in general. But obviously the name Normark, I know the name, but these were supposed to be the best. And still, I know that people still talk about. Yeah. Andy May always talks about them still. So
does he?
Yeah,
that's fun. Yeah, there's a great deal of pressure to try and revive it at the moment, which would be a nice thing to do. But what you have to bear in mind is, I mean, these rods are from sort of late 90s, I suppose. These particular ones, and they were 350 quid or more then.
So I mean, what's that the equivalent of today?
Yeah.
A lot of money.
Whether people would be willing to pay that much. And these were, I mean, you can see the diameter is tiny and the weight is non-existent, but the actions are fabulous. But a lot of money. But it depends how far you want to take it, doesn't it? Try and, if you want to get a good tune, you buy a Fender, don't you? You don't go out and buy something, Marks and Spencer. You need the best, And then it was the same with the reels. In fact, even more with the reels, instead of having J.W. Young on the back, it actually has my name on the back.
When was your first signature model come out? When were you approached? How did that come about then?
God, yeah, that's interesting.
Because obviously we noticed Bob James on this, Bob James on that. That must be something that you're immensely proud of, looking back at that.
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. I mean, you can see, fortunately, I've got another one that I go fishing with. This is my spare one.
Yeah.
But one day I'm going to have to take it out and get it dirty.
Oh, no.
Yeah, because that's what fishing rods are for. I don't like them hanging on a wall.
Yeah. Better to be used.
They're tools. They're meant to be, yeah. And things do progress, although I'm not so sure half the time. But no, it's interesting when you say when did anything first appear with it. I mean, I first got involved with centre pins through a lovely man down in my neck of the woods down in Hampshire called Dave Swallow. He started making centre pins and I kind of got involved with him. And then I was featured a lot a lot of features that I did with centre pins, a lot of people are sort of quite fascinated by it, I think, because it's so different from just using the fixed ball. Not only is it so much nicer to play a fish on the centre pin because it's very close and very personal, it's not a mechanical thing.
Yeah.
But it's the casting techniques as well. The Wallace cast, which is it's really the ultimate way to fish a pin, it means you can cast very flat across the water because it's a sideways cast. It comes very flat across the water. So fishing the sort of places I fish, I can drop a float pretty tight under the trees on the other side, which invariably if you're chub fishing or whatever is a great place to be. But also, when it lands there, the very action of the cast is to swing your rod like this. So the first thing when it arrives at the water is the bait. So the bait drops in, then the shot, then the float. So the whole thing goes down like that. So if you're lucky enough, and I am, you get that immediate bite, which you have to do on the drop.
Right.
Well, because I'm there, because I've cast it off the reel, and the second it's landed, I can strike.
I think I'm too heavy-handed for it.
Well, yeah, because most people would be casting with the fixed ball. They cast like that instead of like that.
Yeah.
And then secondly, when they land, they've got to close the bail arm and so on and click up the
Whereas
slack.
with that, you're in contact straight away.
Instantly. So it goes out, and quite often the float just literally cocks and dips. Pop, I'm there.
No way.
It's a completely different sort of approach, and it's one. I think it's very addictive once you've got the hang of it, but it's something that you've got to spend a little bit more time doing. It's like all sorts of fishing. I'm sure, we're coming to some more of that later. Some fishing's almost like a science now.
Yeah.
I prefer the sort of fishing that's an art.
Yeah.
And then once you start, with your fishing reels, and then your rods progress from that to that, well, your fishing reels need to. So even when I first started fishing reels, they're like that. When I do fishing reels now, they're like that. I mean, there's
Just the progression.
yeah, it's because the rod is now so light, you don't need something the weight of that on it to balance it.
Yeah.
You want something as light as I dare make it. I mean, there's not really a lot of metal in that.
No, it's, but like I said, to have your name on something, it must be tremendous.
Of course it is.
Must be
Fabulous.
tremendous.
Yeah. And apart from anything else, because you are getting to fish with exactly what you want.
So the idea of that, I think some people might just think, oh, they're just, because you're a well-known angler, we'll just pay you to put your name on. Did you have like a big input in the design and development of these?
I remember drawing that back plate.
Wow. So
and so in fact I cut out more than that, and I took it to the MD, and he said, oh no, we can't possibly do that because someone could get their finger through it, and get hurt.
Right.
And I said, have you ever seen American fly fishing reels? They're twice the size of that, and you can put your foot in it.
Yeah.
But okay, he wouldn't. That's the most he would let me take out of it. No, I actually remember drawing it on a rough piece of paper and taking it in to say, look, I want to get rid of all that metal. I want that. And then equally, I've got rid of the metal out the back of it. I've got rid of the metal out of here. I've got rid of the metal out of there.
So yeah, see I think that's the thing, because we obviously all see that some sponsored anglers have things done in their names, and like we talk about the guitars. I was a massive Nirvana fan.
Yeah.
So Kurt Cobain to me, when he designed the Jag Stang, it was called. Mm-hmm. It was a Jag Cross. And at the time, I had one, but I remember thinking, I wonder how much of an input he actually had on it. Obviously, ultimately, I found out that he had a massive input in it.
Yeah, I'm sure that must vary hugely, from one person to another. I think there's sponsored anglers around there who haven't even seen some of the things that have got their names on.
Yeah, I think and that's the interesting thing. I think it's important if you're going to put your name to something, you do what you've done, because obviously, ultimately.
And I think it's got to be something you believe in as well.
Yeah.
I don't think it's got to be even something you necessarily feel. I mean, John did it. Wizzo, bless him. He was a great fishing mate, and he was probably one of the first ones in the sort of general angling world where I am who came out with John Wilson rods and all the rest of it, and he fished with them.
I had a couple of them. I had a couple. I can't remember which one. I can remember I had an Ian Eaps Avon Silstar Trotter. I had one of those.
Oh, good old Ian.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you put them out of the way just so we don't get them damaged.
But yeah, so you get to fish with exactly what you want and specify. If you're doing it in what I consider the right spirit.
Are you still using them as well? Do you still use them?
Oh yeah, okay. The line still sits in there. And equally, you don't judge a sentiment by how long it goes round and round for.
See, that's something else I fell foul to then, because I thought that's
because
what it was.
of the casting style. You're pulling the line. It's got to respond very quickly, so it needs to be very light, a very little initial inertia. And to me, the way you can tell whether the tenterpin is going to work properly or not is just blow on it.
Wow,
that's how sensitive that is.
That's what you want then, isn't it?
Yeah.
we spoke obviously about yourself, Bob, when you were a bit younger, pre-passion.
Yeah, pre-passion. Yeah, it's like pre-war.
I was going to say, yeah. So, but obviously, we can't do an interview without talking about passion.
No,
I know you've spoke about it a lot, and it's been a big part of your life.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you also know that it's been a big part of a lot of other people's lives. For me, I mean, I'm 40, and that video or that series consumed so much of my life, and it was a massive part. And as we've been talking today before the interview, there's things that I even forget that I remember about it, and then you say something.
They're in your subconscious.
Yeah, and I think I said to you, I can still revisit it now. I watched it like only last month, and I'm still as engrossed with it as I was back then.
Thank you.
I wore out the VHS videos, and obviously twice. So, and they used to come in the double pack. So to me, as I'm sure a lot of people are watching this, it was a massive, massive part of our lives. But prior to that, I mean, you've touched on it. Did you do any TV work before that? Had you been on that main screen, or have you been approached by anybody to do anything like that?
Certainly nothing to that sort of scale. But then I don't think anyone had ever made anything to that sort of scale prior to that. It'd only ever been little sort of half hours, which is 25 minutes really. And very sort of made up. Jack Hargraves was, I think, the one that most of my generation grew up watching on television. But that was really a general countryside programme. We'd all be terribly disappointed when we sat down on whatever night it was on, and he'd be judging marrows in the village hall and taking his pony out.
Yeah.
So I don't think that, most programmes probably didn't have fishing in it. But he just had such a lovely approach to it, and it made you feel sort of very comfortable with it, very much something that you wanted to do. And I think that's a stage fishing went through, an unfortunate stage fishing went through, was the ego bit, was the ego trip. I'm going to write a book because I want to tell you how clever I am and show you how many big fish I've caught. Whereas the previous generation wrote fishing books to share their pleasure with you, to share their joy with you, to share their captures with you, not trying to impress you with their captures.
To share their passion of angling.
Yeah, well, there you are, that's the words, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that was very much where we'd got to. And we genuinely didn't set out to make a television programme really about us. It was about fishing. Fishing was starting to get some bad press back then. So one of Hugh's main objectives, and I think, when we talk about passion for angling, we've very much got to talk about Hugh. We were lucky. We were the two that, of all the people he must have known and went fishing with, were chosen to do it.
Yeah, well, I've got that. I was going to say to you, how did he approach you, and what was your initial reaction like to it?
My recollection of it, and I seem to... And I think Hugh's recollection of it, but someone else seems to have a slightly different recollection of it, but that's how history goes, isn't it? Was that Hugh was making a programme called Tom's River. It wasn't going to be called that originally, but it ended up being called Tom's River. It was going to be a programme about a year in the life of a river. And if you've never seen it, YouTube it. I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube now, and if it's not, you can actually buy it. Tom's River, Hugh Miles. And I met him when he was making that on the estate that I lived on at the time, via the river keeper, and that's how Hugh and I met. And his approach to what he was doing, his dedication, his application and so on, was awe-inspiring. He was a man who would just never stop till he got exactly what he'd got in his head he wanted. Yeah. Physically, mentally, anyway, and I thought, this is amazing. And then I saw some of the other stuff he'd done, Kingdom of the Ice Bear and Flight of the Condor. He'd made some of the most amazing wildlife films that had ever been made. Well, so the fact that he was now going to focus that down onto fishing, and then the fact that meeting him where he was doing the Tom's River one, that's how it really all came together. And I didn't think that he and Chris knew each other at that point. I think he might have written to Chris a couple of times. And he said to me, do you know Chris? And I said, yes. And he said, I think you two would be exactly what I'm looking for the ingredients in this programme, this series. You're
doing my job for me here, because my next question was, what was your relationship with... Obviously, on screen, you and Chris, it's probably one of the best partnerships in an angling video we've ever seen. Yeah. It was fantastic. So what was like your relationship with Chris prior to passion? I mean, how did you know each other, and had you been fishing?
We just bumped into each other because... in spite of the fact, we seem to be so different in many of the things that we do, many of our approaches, I think certainly back in our fishing at that point, we were very much kindred spirits. You don't have to have, all the latest gear or kit and caboodle to catch fish, or even to catch big fish. Well, Chris is living proof of that, isn't he? He caught the record carp on the rod that Richard Walker had made about 50 years before that. You know. So that was a genuine sort of play-off. But at that time, I had a lot of old tackle, and I liked using a lot of the old fishing tackle as well. And actually, Passion kind of changed it, because Hugh picked up on that, and he said, so he sort of decided it'd be quite fun if we had this, not war, but this like play-off.
Technology to the past.
Otherwise, I'd have been using more old stuff than I was, to be honest.
Yeah.
So that became a bit of fun. And Chris is always late and so on.
I know plenty of people like that. Yeah,
disorganised. And
so it's very much so. The characters that you are on Passion, obviously, they are.
Yeah, they're us.
That's
they are
Hugh's
us.
people.
Yeah.
And I think that's what endears so many people to it, because for me, it was just the way you were on screen. It was like just fantastic to watch. And I spoke to you before. Even if somebody did something that was better than Passion now, I don't think it would ever be.
No, it wouldn't really. I mean, there's 2 points I think I'll pick up on that one. One is, several of my show busy type friends, I'm sure many of you know some of the ones I go fishing with, have basically said there's been basically 3 high points in fishing as regards the public, and that was The Complete Angler by Isaac Walton.
Yep. And
that was Mr. Crabtree Goes Fishing by Bernard Venables, and then it as a passion for angling. Nothing else has ever even entered the same league as those 3.
No.
Which would be verified out by the book sales and the fact Passion for Angling still sells 37 years later or whatever it is, and I still get a royalties check every year.
That is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah.
It's just a phenomenal thing when you think, wow, is that how long ago it was as well?
Yeah.
That's scary, isn't it?
1993 first went out.
Wow.
So, but the other point was that there was never going to be any advertising in it. There was never going to be any sort of product reference of any sort whatsoever. In fact, we cut the labels off of everything we used. Absolutely everything. Even if we used a Marks and Spencer jumper, label came out. Because apart from that, labels sort of jar in any situation like that, especially in nature. But we consciously didn't want to know about any of that whatsoever. And equally, it wasn't going to be an ego trip. We made sure that the other one wasn't going to have an ego trip, because you still got knocked off your perch if you got a bit carried away with that.
But that's how it's worked, doesn't it? I mean, that's why it works so well.
I think that's how it should work. And it was back to the thing I was just saying about how the old fishing books, which Chris and I both grew up on. We both grew up on that same sort of mantra, if you'd call it, of these lovely old people. We used to read about, who wanted to share their experience, wanted to encourage you to do it or whatever. But then the biggest issue was we wanted to show people genuinely what we felt fishing is actually about. That was Hugh's biggest thing. He said no one has touched really for me or him on what is it about fishing, what is it that makes us want to go fishing, what is it that makes us want to be there, and so on. Not just, oh, this is how I do it, or so that was quite a big thing to try and set out to do. And the first program that we did a rough idea of all the things we wanted to do, and they were going to be half an hour's, and we went out and made a sort of rough of the first program, and you just came back and he said, I can't do it. Well, we went, why? What can't you do? He said, I can't do it in half hours. He said, it's going to be a hard sell to sell 1 hour, but we're going to go for 1 hour. And at that time, no one had come up with the fishing season. Programs are an hour long.
Yeah.
I mean, that was unthinkable. But we pulled it off.
It worked.
Hugh pulled it off.
Yeah.
And it just became massive. I mean, it's very flattering for me to see, guys like you, and you go, that influenced me and so on. And it's very pleasing because we did want it to do that.
It certainly has. Obviously, it's not just me. There's it's well known that passion.
No, I won't be too sort of shy about it.
Yeah.
There was some argument going on the other day with somebody about what we did when we were at Redmine, Chris and I, when we were at Redmine, and someone came back and said, "No, I'm telling you, this is how it was because I'm sat in my bivvy at Redmine now watching it."
Exactly.
You think, well, these guys are actually at the venue, but they're still watching the program 40 years later.
It's timeless as well, though, isn't it? It is timeless because, like I said to you, you can watch it at any time and give it a month. And you're ready to watch that episode again. So it's not like something that you watch once like a film and you think, oh, I know how the ending is.
I don't think... I mean, I'm sure it's... I don't know what you've got in your head on here or where you want to go to with this, but it is back to this thing of, that group of people coming together with kindred spirits like minds at that time. That bit has to be luck. I can't give Hugh enough praise or credit for what he achieved, but... he still had to have that luck.
Stars align.
You still have to have luck, whatever you're trying to do in life, and it came together right.
Did you have any idea about the success it was going to be?
No, not vaguely. No, I didn't have any idea on how that would affect our lives.
At what point did you think this is going to be special? Was it after production or when you...
No, that's I have an exact moment for that one. Hugh, we made the Redmine programme first, although they weren't shown in that order. And that's when he said he couldn't do it in half an hour. He got to do it in hours. And he was just so chuffed with it because he said, quite openly, he said, we might not be able to work together. We've no idea. We just got to go out and try it. Obviously, it was a huge investment for Hugh for his money and time. And at the end of it, he just said, this is the dream. This is everything I wanted it to be. And then when we were editing it, because it's a production, it's not like a modern sort of video thing. There's 5, 6, 7 soundtracks running at various times on that, with the music, the wildlife track, Hugh, me, Bernard, Cribbins doing the narration. Chris Sanford, you left him out of the team, haven't you? No one remembers Chris Sanford, but I knew Chris, I still know Chris, and he's another voiceover man. So we're in the sound studios, Olympic Studios, which is in Soho. So we're in an underground studio, massive, elaborate place, big production place, underneath a load of strip clubs. I mean, it's like so incongruous, isn't it, to be doing some voiceover for a fishing series. But Hugh insisted this was the man, Trevor Barber, and this was the studio he did it in. Because there were times when a plane would go over or something, and he'd be right in the middle of some really great little sequence, and some little plane would go buzzing over. So you have to, then go into the studio and revoice that bit so they can cut that off and so on. It was so much more complicated then than it is now. I heard an interesting parallel someone did the other day, a radio DJ, about one of the big heavy metal rock hits. And he said when they recorded that, I forget how many years ago it was years and years ago, he said it would be easier to record that now on a mobile phone than it was with the equipment that they had back then. It took so long to do. So there we are in this studio under the ground with this great engineer, Trevor Barber, and he's taken home the rushes to familiarise himself a bit more with it. And when he came in the next day, he said, I think you got something here, lads. He's not a fisherman, he knows nothing about fishing. And he said, oh, that's great. Well, what's that? He said, I was watching it, and he said, my 16-year-old daughter came to the door of the lounge and said, oh, what's this, Dad? And he said, oh, this is the latest thing that I'm working on. And she said, oh, smashing. And he said, when it finished, he still stood in the doorway. He said, you're talking about a 16-year-old girl going out for an evening out. He said, it's got something. He said, at the moment, I can't tell you what it is, but it's something that draws people into it. But then, what was that? Was that was Hugh's photography? That was, to some degree, Chris and I. That was Bernard Cribbins' amazing narration. I mean, and when you bear in mind, you sit in the studio with the guy and he'd watch the scene and then they'd just roll it again and he'd do the voiceover. I mean, he could just put himself in those places, and because he was a fisherman. Yeah. Then you had Chris Sanford, who did the quotes, because in a lot of the books that had influenced Chris and I, which keeps sort of coming back into this conversation, we had quotes from those. 1 or 2 we read ourselves, I seem to remember, BB when we were at Redmine, but most of them were read by Chris Sanford. And then you start to realise the level of professionalism of the people that you're dealing with, because he would sit down and we'd say, "Oh yeah, this is a bit by Hugh Temple Sheringham. There's a classic, real favourite of Chris and I." And he'd say, "Oh, where did he come from?" He came from Nottingham." How old was he? Well, he was in his 50s. Right? And suddenly, this man who was talking to you had suddenly had this, did he smoke? He used to say, "Did he smoke?" And suddenly he could bring on this voice of a 57-year-old bloke from Nottingham who smoked and got a bit of a rough edge to his voice to do the quote. You just think, whoa, you know. And then because Hugh's brilliant idea, another one of Hugh's ideas, because what you have to bear in mind was he was a classical musician before that as well. His father was a conductor.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, you see. And I'll tell you what's even funnier. I had a man sat here 2 days ago who was telling me that his father was in an orchestra, and it was the orchestra that Hugh Miles was in.
Wow, small world, isn't it?
Yeah, back in the fishing. But, so, you know, obviously Hugh had this huge appreciation of very fun classical music. So he said, "No, I've got this woman, I want to ask if she'll write the music for it." So Hugh got Jenny Muscat to write the music for it. Now, everybody, you can't think of it now, but if I played you 3 notes of that tune, you know it's Passion for Angling.
Yeah, it's iconic, isn't it? The opening to it. And then the wicker basket, Chris flicks it. It's just, you can still see it in your head now. And the funny thing is, it's making me smile.
Yeah.
When you see that and hear
joy,
that, it's just like boom. And it's, you know, for that, no matter what's going on, for that hour, that's it. It's, you're in your zone and you're watching that, and it just brings back great memories.
Yeah. So I think somewhere or another, hopefully, you've got the thing of how all those things came together at that time, at that place. And there's a certain amount of, there's a great element of luck in that. For
the stars just aligned, as we said, didn't they?
No,
Definitely.
it's not just something, you couldn't just, and I think the point I was trying to answer was, could we have made it again? Well, we never had any intention to make it again. It was a statement. It was something we wanted to say. We wanted to present it to Joe Public and say, look, actually, forget all this stuff you're hearing from all these antis and all the rest of it. This is fishing. This is about what we do, you know, etc., etc. Which we hoped and which did, I think, gave fishing a huge boost at that time. Which you must have done.
Yeah,
I mean, some people like you going, well, it inspired me to go fishing.
Yeah, definitely.
So we achieved what our goal was, and if we'd come up with another series, wind that one back very slightly. Hugh said, if you're going to make 6 programmes, they've each got to get slowly better for people to perceive them as good. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if we'd have gone out and then tried to make the whole thing again, it would have had to have been better.
Which would have
for
been
people
hard.
to have perceived it as being as good.
Did you ever have those discussions though? I mean,
But doing it again?
off
No.
the back of it, I mean, let's just say it's been done. You found out how successful it was. You must have had pressure from the television companies to do it again. Did you ever have that conversation?
Yeah.
Just never discussed.
No.
Do you think that it might have been a good idea, or are you standing by? Listen,
No,
we made the statement.
I'm very happy. I'm very happy that we did it. We made the statement. The chemistry, even say between Chris and I, wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can totally understand that. It took. How long did it take?
3 years.
Wow.
Not constantly.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, Hugh was still a wildlife filmmaker, so he was going
off
off
work.
to. He was filming snow leopards as well at the time, so he was disappearing for months to, you know, Tibet or somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, he's a man who had a lot of projects going on in his life, unlike Chris and I.
Yeah.
We were available.
Yeah. Well, no, thankfully, otherwise we wouldn't have had the video, would we? So.
No. I mean, as it was, Hugh did have a sort of another go, and I don't want to comment too much on that one. I think the fact that it sort of popped up and sang fairly quickly,
Yeah.
it says it all. You know, whereas Passion has just become, I don't know, is it a legend? What would you call it?
It's iconic, isn't it?
It just somehow seems to continue to grow.
I don't think it'll ever stop growing as long as fishing's going, because there's always going to be that passion for angling, isn't there?
Yeah.
So Bob, we've mentioned, obviously, you was a massive part.
Did you say So Bob then or Sir Bob then?
Well, it can be either. Well, there's 2 Sir Bobs. That's the issue, isn't there? There's Sir Bob Nudd, Sir
Yeah.
Bob James. So
Yeah.
you'll have to fight over the title.
No, we're going to fight. You never find Bob and I fighting.
So obviously we mentioned Hugh Miles and the significant role he had in Passion, but there's obviously another 2 Bernards that were involved in it as well, and we've got to mention them because obviously there's Bernard Venables, Mr. Crabtree,
Yeah.
and then the superb narration by Bernard Cribbins, who's both obviously sadly passed away.
Yeah, sadly, Bernard Cribbins quite recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, that man who was always so full of life and optimism.
And he's done so much, hasn't he? He's done so...
I don't suppose you even hear half of what he's done. You know, I mean, the guy's not just done all those wonderful kids programs and the Railway Children. That was that massive film he did, wasn't it? Comedy things he's been in. I think he's had at least 4 top 10 records.
You said this to me because I did some research. I obviously knew who he was, but I didn't realise how much stuff he'd done.
Yeah.
It was absolutely insane.
Yeah. Just the music thing, because he made a record called Right Said Fred, which must have been might have been the 60s, might have been the 50s, I don't know. And then along came a band and named themselves after the record.
I remember them.
So then he did a song with them.
I didn't know that either.
And he did. What else did he do?
He did the hole of the ground one. You said, didn't you?
Yeah, and then because he did the Wombles thing.
Yeah.
The guy's just, and it goes back a long way as well. You tend to forget how old he was because he was always so
vibrant.
And full of energy and enthusiasm for what he was doing. But then, because Venables was the same with his fishing. You know, he wouldn't sleep. You know, he'd say, we're going to go and do so-and-so tomorrow, Bernie. We're going to go tench fishing. You know, we want to start early. Yeah, smashing, we'll start early. Well, set your alarm. No, I won't need an alarm. Oh, okay, that's great. You know, I'm saying all that now because, but those guys were my age when I was working with them, and I think of them as old men.
Yeah, no.
And now I'm the old man.
No, but I mean, it was really nice to see that because they were kind of like your generation before, especially Bernard, obviously Venables with the Mr. Crabtree. Yeah. You must have grown up reading that.
100%, absolutely. Yeah,
and then you're fishing with him. You're taking him fishing, and it was like the torch has been passed. That's how it felt to me.
Yeah, that's lovely. That's nice. Thank you.
That's how it felt, especially obviously when you're taking him fishing, and I still remember the little bits from that in there. So I mean, he was Mr. Fishy, wasn't it? Effectively, when you were
particularly, I suppose, for the children of my generation, because it was sort of aimed at children, but there was actually a lot of information in there.
Yeah,
and there's certainly a massive amount of inspiration in there.
Definitely. I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody. I mean, it's obviously a lot before my time, but I'm still aware of what it was. So,
and he also wrote a lot of actual fishing books. You know, I think everyone just remembers him from Mr. Crabtree, which in a way is a bit of a shame. You know, a bit like remembering Yates just for Passion for Angling, which would be unfair because he's written some of the best modern fishing books there's been.
How did that come about? Did you obviously was involved in Passion, but did you know him prior to that? Had you?
Yes, I'd met Bernard quite a few times prior to that. We'd been fishing, but actually to pin me down as to where I first bumped into Bernard would actually be quite difficult. I don't think it was on the riverbank. I suspect it was probably at some sort of function. It's like all sort of sports, I suppose. You tend to get to a certain sort of level in it, and I don't know quite what you become, but you tend to get invited to things. You know, people want you there, which is very nice, and often that means you get to meet some of the people that you've always wanted to meet. And certainly Bernard Venables was one of those, because he was always he was really gentlemanly. You know, he's only a little chap. But always very, and again, another one, so full of enthusiasm still for the sport and just the whole thing of being out there and the fact there was always more to come.
Yeah, you could tell that just by watching him.
His voice. I mean, it's, again, a lovely speaking voice, isn't it?
Yeah.
And because I suppose my generation, we sort of grew up as people like him as the sort of archetypal sort of countryman fishermen with their little pipe and tweeds. But
it was still like it became like it wasn't just here's an episode with him in. It became like the third one of you two, if that made sense.
I guess he did, as you say, even though he wasn't in it.
Yeah,
for that long. But then is that just a kindred spirit thing?
Maybe.
We just sort of immediately sort of gelled.
Well, whatever it was, it worked. So
good. Well, that's nice. But that doesn't place me on his level, I'm afraid.
Well, we spoke about, and this one, I've had so many people message me about this next one, and it was something I was going to ask you anyway. But obviously, we've heard about the Stars of Passion. But you're obviously all grade B actors compared to who I'm going to talk about next.
Yeah.
You're going to have to tell us about the real stars of the show, which were Chester and Raps, because that was
Not the
amazing.
fish. Were the fish not the main
No,
stars?
definitely
Okay.
Chester and Raps made it. So
Yeah, it was that period. I think we spoke about earlier where I'd escaped, London completely and gone and totally immersed myself in the countryside, which is what I'd always wanted to do. And having a dog was clearly very high on that list. And I'd met quite a lot of keepers by then. I was very lucky, so I got to know that part of the woods around Dorset Way very well through another connection. This is a very complicated story, really, because a great friend of mine was a man called Greg Lake, who was a great fisherman and a great friend, and in a band called Emerson, Lake and Palmer, prior to being in after being in King Crimson, which was even better. Well, anyway, that's before your time. You wouldn't even have heard of him. And he bought a little estate down in Dorset, so I got to meet a lot of keepers and people via Greg and his keeper, young Robert, and then I got to know the keeper on the lake where we filmed Monster Myths.
yeah,
I'd known about that, and
that's with Harry in it. Is that with Harry in? Yeah.
And Ron Thorpe was the actual keeper over there at that point. And I'd seen them all with their dogs and stuff, and just loved it all, And a lot of them down in that part of the world still work flat-coated retrievers, is what they're called. One of the very early dogs, and the keepers really favour them down there. So I'd always had this hankering to have a flat-coated retriever, and so Raps was the first one. And then, because he was always out with me, my wife said, "Oh, it's all very well having a dog. There's no way to bark when someone comes to the door." So I said, "Well, if you want a dog, you have a dog. What do you want?" "Oh, yeah, I'll have a flat-coated retriever." "Oh, okay." So I got Chester, and. But because, you can imagine, Chester was not the least bit interested in standing to bark at the postman.
I was going to say, you ended up taking both anyway.
Yeah. He just looked and went, "Oh, so I'm supposed to sit and barking at the postman while you two go off jollying around all these estates." So I ended up with the two.
Yeah.
And then one that's been left off your list. She did it. Yeah. You see, she only paid a minor role, but there you are.
Yeah,
little
poking her head out through the sleeping bags.
Yeah,
I come, and that's my fault. I apologise about that. I've just been thinking, and I was thinking, I forgot the little terrier.
That was Little Thistle, a little border Jack Russell cross.
Yeah.
So she ended up we went down to Blanford Forum and found that little dog for her.
And you stole her as well?
Oh, yeah, because she wasn't going to sort of watch the pair of us walk out the door every morning. Wasn't going to go, "Bye, see you later." So she decided she was part of the gang. I mean, to be fair, she couldn't be when I was what I nearly called serious fishing. Then I don't do serious fishing. Whereas the boys, they would quite.
She wanted to be out.
Yeah, she'd be climbing up everything, wrecking everything. So no, she did end up being the mainly at home dog.
Oh wow.
But I worked Raps and Chester.
Did you?
It was something, again, I got a huge amount of pleasure and satisfaction from actually working the dogs, building that sort of relationship with a dog that you can work together. And there's a lovely old boy down there called Charlie Mitchell who had flat coats. And I can remember when I first started down there with mine, and some of the others were taking the mickey a bit because they weren't the easiest dog to train. And they said, "You'll never get a flat coat to work for you." And when they'd gone, I was a bit disappointed, I have to admit, and I was at an impressionable age. And Charlie said to me, "They're right." I said, "What?" He said, "You won't ever get a flat-coat retriever to work for you." And I sort of looked. He said, "But you get a flat-coat retriever to work with you."
Yeah.
And they were like magic words to me. It was like one of those moments. I suddenly knew exactly what he meant. He didn't just shout it and tell you what to do. You've got to be on a wavelength.
Yeah.
And establishing that and doing that. Yeah, I did. I absolutely adored that. So I used to go off picking up. You didn't get paid much, but it meant you had a lovely day on a wonderful estate. You usually got quite a nice lunch.
But you can see that
with your dog.
You can see that. There's obviously
like sort of they're like companions.
Yeah. I know that obviously Bird of Cribbage in the videos are saying, "Oh, the gaffer's watching," but it was kind of like they weren't. They didn't see you as the boss. It was like, "Well, we're out with you. That's it. We're all there together." So
and it was quite flattering because Hugh said he'd worked with quite a few animals and he loved it. He said I've never worked. He said I'd never imagined I could work with dogs and it'd be like this.
And I think again, like you said, that was for me. That was the whole magic of Passion.
That whole aspect that came at the right time, didn't it? If we'd done it 5 years later, it would have been different.
I was going to ask you about how obviously that's what that explains it. When obviously was it both of them that used to like to go and get the fish, or was it just Chester?
No, it was only Raps.
Raps, was it?
Yeah, yeah.
So that was from the retrieving element of him, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I never really tried it so much with Chester. But that was such a simple thing because there's a lovely book, I think, if I remember rightly, it was called A Ring of Wessex Waters. And in it, there's a chap called Colonel Ratcliffe, who's got this flat-coated retriever retrieving his fish about a century ago, you know.
Yeah.
And Robbie Starr was a friend of mine down there who works on the river down there. He said, well, you know, what about this then? You know, I went, yeah, all right then. So we got a fly rod and walked to the carrier. I mean, I lived so close to the river. They walked over to the carrier, caught a trout, played it till it stayed, you know, still, and then just fetch, and he went straight and picked it up, brought it out. And the amazing thing was, and obviously you've seen the other film, there's not a scale missing.
Yeah.
How you can hang on to
Soft
something
mouth,
so slippery,
yeah.
And you could unhook it and just let it go, gone again. I think
Brilliant.
it actually caused it less trouble than the landing net.
Yeah, probably.
And it had other advantages as well, you see, because more than once I've been walking down the river and my hat's blown off.
Right. You can get in and get it.
Fetch it.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. So there was
We
you
had to mention-
if you left anything behind, if you're walking along and something dragged out of your bag, you'd find him following you along with it in his mouth.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so you can't get a much better fishing companion than that. And he never argued, never told me I was a twat or anything. Just went along with it.
Perfect partnership by the sounds of it. No, but we had to bring them up because yes, obviously Bob James, Chris Yates, but they were the real stars if we're being honest.
Well, that's lovely.
So, obviously, passion. A lot of people have said about things that if they've done something big in their life, after that's gone, and I don't just mean the video, I mean like businesses, people that try and get to the top of a
and then
company.
you step off.
Once they get there, there's nothing left, or there's a void.
Yeah.
Once you've done passion, and obviously it had taken up 3 years of your life, was there any like strange feelings? How did you feel about it? Was there like an emptiness to it, or how did you feel?
It's another one of those bit multifaceted, I think, really. I mean, obviously the biggest effect it had was, I was reasonably well known in the fishing world, but now, I don't know how to put it immodestly, but now you're almost, one of the biggest names in fishing, not just a name in fishing. But you've also now got millions of Joe Public. You go into shops and people are recognising you, asking if you autograph and all this, which is not really what you anticipate when you start off as a fisherman, really.
Yeah.
Had I gone off, become the multi-talented, fantastic musician, then maybe, but for a fisherman. And bear in mind, because it's just grown. I mean, I think we sold the BBC 4 UK showing rights, and they put it on a massive slot on a Sunday evening. That was a really big slot for a fishing programme to get. I've never seen anyone get anything vaguely like it since. So we had huge audiences, millions, which I don't think anyone could have anticipated. And the book was a huge success. And I went off, did all sorts of other things. It definitely changed my life in several ways. Some of them probably more permanently than others. So I can see what you mean by the sort of void thing, because somehow you're in a sort of an unreal world. You're in a non-reality thing.
Yeah, when you've been used to something that's been a part of your life for because 3 years is a long time.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean just so much from that, for the fact that I'm not even sure whether, because there's a lot concertinaed into the programme, it'd be very easy to think that every time I go out fishing and I just chuck it in and you catch your fish.
Yeah.
As we all know, you have to put
Work
a bit more
for
into it than
yeah.
that. And my interest in a lot of other things had sort of come to the fore around that time. And other people's perception of you changes. I think other people's perception of you changes far more than you change when something like that happens. Everyone goes, oh, he did that and he changed. But because they all expect you to be that character. They all expect you to do that all the time.
Yeah.
And I can see why famous film stars and so on, 20 years later having hair transplants and facelifts and all the rest of it. I can remember, 30 years after making Passion, or whatever it was, 25 years old, back in, walking around down the River Avon and seeing one couple, I particularly noticed them because they've got 2 otter hounds, pets, so, they weren't hunting otters.
Yeah.
And I saw them walk by, and I saw them walking by again. It was one of those ones, and then eventually they sort of stopped. Oh, you, the Bob James. That's how they said, you, the Bob James. And I said, yeah. And they were Dutch. And clearly they found out where I lived, and they were walking around in this area hoping to bump into me.
Yeah.
And because the next thing they'd sort of look down, they said, well, where are the dogs? I said, that was 27 years ago, whatever it was. How long do you think a flat-coated retriever lives for? Oh. And it dawned on me, particularly at that moment, they obviously expected me to look exactly the same. They expected the dogs to be exactly the same. So people, my life goes on, but everyone else has still got that perception of me.
Definitely.
I'm still there, and I'm not.
That's a testament to what you did, because like I said to you, it's like a immortal bit of film, and that's the important bit.
I guess that's absolutely right,
and that's why we continue to watch it, and that's why it continues to be popular. And as soon as you watch it, I mean, I think I've got that coming up, but it takes you back. It does take 20 odd years back, and you're back as that little kid in your bedroom watching it. So I mean, when I was setting up for this, I'm not going to lie, there's bits of you that still you do think, oh, Chester and Raps, I wonder. And then you're like, no, don't be silly. It's like 30 years ago. But you do.
Unfortunately, Bernard, Chester, Raps, all of them.
Yeah, and that's life. Life does go on. Makes me feel old. But life goes on. But I think that's that's going to be around for a lot longer than we will be, if that makes sense.
I guess so. Because you were saying, how much did it change your life? Well, I think it's it particularly sudden. We've talked about other people in my life, and people I go fishing with. Let's pick on Chris Tarrant as an example. Chris worked for years building his sort of profile and his portfolio up and all the rest of it, and ends up doing things as massive as a millionaire and so on. So it's almost like an acclimatation period. Well, we didn't have that. 1 minute we were just 2 guys who went fishing and Chris wrote books. I basically just did magazine articles, but suddenly we've gone from that to that, one hit. So there's not been any sort of getting used to it or something. I don't know quite what I'm trying to say, but it's quite a sort of culture shock. And then I thoroughly enjoyed the bit off the back of it, which obviously didn't appeal to Chris really very much. I know he does 1 or 2 very small sort of little talk things a year. I went off and I was doing after dinner speeches, and Lloyd's of London and all sorts of I loved it because I love talking about what I do. I'm very happy to be challenged on it. I love being heckled. So it was great going to do some of those talks, because instead of it being just a little captive audience of fishermen all just nod and agree with everything you do, suddenly you're out in a world of people more educated, more successful, or whatever, the big world.
Yeah.
And they're going to give you, if they think you've got a bit wrong over, they're on it.
They're going to let you know about it.
And I loved it because I don't have to dream them up. I'm not trying to dream up stories. I'm just recalling what I did. So it's not as if you have to have any sort of conscience or whatever about it. You can just give it back as
talking about
it came, So that sort of went on for quite a long time. It's quite tiring because you do a lot of miles driving around doing it.
And I think it's got to be something that you're passionate about, like you said again. I mean, it's got to be something that you want to do.
I love the whole interaction with the people doing it.
Are you still doing bits of that now?
No, virtually none now.
Is that your choice or just?
Yeah, pretty well. Yeah,
well, you don't need to do anything else. You've got your patch of heaven now, haven't you? So
I mean, this is just a paid hobby, what I do now. It's quite nice because it means I get to go fishing, and I do meet a lot of really nice people. A lot of them, become good friends.
Yeah.
And we're just here sharing our passion,
So after Passion, did you and Chris do much fishing together still?
No, we didn't really. I think in some ways it was quite funny because, as I said earlier, it was sort of used as part of the playoff and part of the fun, that we were opposite ends of the spectrum. But then I think, I went off into my little world of what it did for me, which was doing the fishing tackle and stuff like that. And Chris obviously went off into his little world.
Went to different directions.
And then Hugh, I don't know, I can't remember what the first thing Hugh did after that, but he obviously had plenty more to go off and do.
Yeah, he's just gone on, hasn't he, with the wildlife and other things he's been doing. So
yeah, I mean, I think he's pretty well calling it a day these days. But so no, the answer to that. Oh, well, I think that answers that about as well as I can, really.
Yeah. So we've obviously had a run through of Bob up to that point. Let's talk about Bob now, right?
Right.
So in regards just to sport, like what do you like? How do you see the sport today? I mean, what do you think about it? How it's gone from when you were young to where it's transitioned to what it is today? I mean, what's your views on it?
Oh, it's changed massively. I suppose for somebody a bit more traditional like me, I suppose the first thing you'd sort of do is look at commercials and go, oh. But actually, I don't. Funnily enough, it's not somewhere I'd choose to go fishing generally. I have been to some. I've done when I was doing magazine features, and every now and again they go, "Well, you don't go and fish day ticket waters or whatever," so they'd send me off to fish a day ticket water. And some of them, over the years now, have developed into some really quite nice places, and a lot of them have become far more aware of the conservation use of a lot of the area around some of those commercials, which is nice to see. But the biggest point that I would make about it is how many kids would be allowed to go fishing like I did, just get on their bike and ride now?
Yeah, it wouldn't happen, would it?
No. So the commercials fill that gap. The parents can drop them off there. There's a toilet. There's somewhere they can get a drink. There's someone around to look after them. So I think they have actually filled quite a big niche. I think fishing would be in a much worse state. And I mean my style of fishing, not just the style of commercial fishing, if they weren't there for just the kids alone. And you've got a lot more disabled anglers now.
Yeah.
You know, a few years ago when I said, well, disabled, forget it. Where do you think you're going to get in a wheelchair?
Yeah.
Well, why shouldn't they share?
Well, we have
sport?
disabled pegs now, don't we?
Exactly.
Well? So,
That's what I'm saying. So the commercials again have really filled that peg. And I think a lot of other more sort of ordinary rural fishing clubs have taken the thing and gone, oh yeah, and brought a couple of fishing, wheelchair pegs in.
Yeah.
So there's benefits in all of that as well. As regards to sort of overall management of fishing, that's getting pretty heavy and pretty political. And I've had my bum bitten getting too involved with politics and all the rest of it because I opened my mouth with what I believed in. I wasn't a public school boy, so I guess I didn't know how to couch it and had to always have some smart answer. All the rest of it, I just went blazing in, saying no, this shouldn't be happening or whatever. I'd be a lot wiser if I did it again, but I ain't going to do it again.
Yeah.
So, fishing's where it is now. There's a huge amount of, is it pressure? If you just take, the River Wye here where I am, I've now got a lot of canoes. I've got a lot of paddle boarders. I've got people who just think you can walk off into the countryside and have a picnic and so on. Unfortunately, a large percentage of whom just think you leave your used barbecue and the process of what you've eaten on the bank. There's too many people in the countryside now who don't understand the countryside.
Yeah.
They think it's just there. No one has to do anything. They don't realise that. I spend days down there keeping this piece of river the way it is, or it'd just be a jungle. But that's just life, isn't it? Life's just moved on. I think in very many ways, if you're trying to get me to be a bit philosophical here or whatever, I'm probably of the luckiest generation that's ever been born in this country. I didn't have to fight a war.
Yeah.
In the 60s, Britain was the centre of the universe when I was a teenager. So it's a nice coincidence. Whereas, now it's such a sort of different place, isn't it?
It's very political, and you have to be very careful what you say in this day and age, don't you?
Yeah,
and
quite.
That's why I find myself in a lot of trouble now. So my partner tells me, so I have to be careful a lot.
Yeah. I think I probably have got better at answering questions without going over the top, as hopefully I've just illustrated.
Yeah, very much so. So on that same kind of thread, if Bob could go back to young Bob and give him some advice, what would you say to yourself? What would you?
I don't know. I've had one or two interesting ones like that. I've had the bucket list one. I don't know if you saw that. Someone recently did a thing. They said, "What's my bucket list?" And I produced a bucket with a cup of tea in it. And I said, sitting there by the river while having a cup of tea. I Do you know what I'm tempted to say? I'm tempted to say do it again.
Do it all again.
Yeah.
Well, it's worked, hasn't it? You've had from what you've said, like you've kind of lived
There's
the dream.
bits that arguably you could have done better. There's things I could have done better, whatever. But it doesn't work out like that, does it?
No.
So I think probably the best thing is old Bob saying to young Bob, just go and do it again.
Just have a good time.
Wasn't a bad ride, was it?
Yeah, too right. And that's lovely to hear that, because sometimes we hear people saying they've got regret. Obviously, we've all got regrets.
Yeah,
but
things you've done wrong.
there's nothing that you drastically changed because it's got you to where you are today.
I've got a lot of nice people around me in my world now. There's been times when it hasn't been. There was a lot of envy off the back of passion.
Yeah,
that
you're
I
always
didn't
gonna
even
get that,
realise at the time. To be honest, I've always been pretty straightforward with people, and I thought they were the same with me. There's things like that I could sort of think, oh, I'd handle that differently. I'd be a bit smarter with that.
Yeah.
And I guess the obvious one for anybody in this sort of generation is, well, you should have been a millionaire off the back of it. And I'm sure if somebody had found me an agent like they do now, if you've appeared on a television show once as a contestant.
Or a financial advisor.
Yeah, financial advice might have been good too. Yeah. But you round all that off, but you never know where that would have taken it.
Yeah.
So going through the overall path, my wife and I are happy. We always tell everyone we're happier than we've ever been.
Yeah.
Which is amazing after all that time with me going fishing. I get as much, if not more, out of my fishing now than I ever have done. I get a huge amount of enjoyment out of fishing with other people and getting them to catch fish. It's often such silly little things that they've not got.
Yeah,
that it's just missing because I think they can find it in a book or a magazine rather than just being out there and doing it and watching what you're doing. Most of my fishing in my life, it's just been common sense and logic.
Yeah. Well, you say that. I don't know about that. There's obviously a lot of natural talent in there as well.
I don't know. Perhaps everyone's got natural talent if they're put in the position.
You haven't seen me
fishing
lucky.
Yet. No, I haven't seen you fishing yet. That could be next.
Yeah. So, Bob, with the developments and obviously social media now from when you were a lad, because obviously there wasn't Facebook and all that.
Barely electricity.
So, if you could give advice to a youngster that wanted to try and tread the steps of Bob James, trying to get where you've been.
Oh, yeah.
Because obviously you had disadvantages compared to what they've got now with the social media presences.
Yeah.
But you call it luck, but it's obviously been a lot of hard work as well to get where you are. You said earlier yourself that you've basically made a living out of your hobby.
I think if you're trying to put some realism on me and what I've done, I've always been prepared to sort of take a chance or invest a bit of time in something. Whereas an awful lot of people, they've said to me, they say, oh, you're lucky you've had all these chances. Yeah, but I took them. You probably had those chances, but you didn't take them because you're too worried about the fact you wouldn't be able to pay the mortgage or whatever. See, that's never stopped me.
That's what I'm saying. So you just decided. So I hope your advice isn't to the youngsters: don't pay your mortgage.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Don't pay your mortgage. You've got to have a passion for it.
Yeah.
We keep using that word, and
because it's an apt. It's
so
to use,
appropriate to what we're talking about and what we're believing in. Too many people, I think, try to do things these days solely on a sort of commercial basis, and I'm sure many of them must succeed.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't have had as much fun as I've had.
Yeah. So so you just say to them, just go for it. If that's what you.
I think you've got to decide what level you're going to do it at, haven't you? I mean, equally now, how many paint companies are there? I think someone told me they'd gone on the internet and found 250 and gave up.
Wow.
So, a lot of them think, oh, I'll get sponsored from a bait. Well, I think you find most bait sponsorship these days probably means you get your bait at trade price.
Yeah.
If you're really lucky, you might be getting your bait for nothing. But that means you've got to put something else in. But you're still going to be paying for your fishing, paying for your tackle, paying for your food, paying for your transport.
I think most sponsorships, when a lot of the sponsored anglers today claim to be sponsored, it's just a discount off the retail price, isn't it?
If we're going to be really cheeky here, an awful lot of them are sponsored. They're sponsored by the government. It's called On the Dole.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No. Yeah.
And there's a few famous names around, in the carp fishing world who are sponsors.
Thankfully, I'm not involved in the politics of carp world. I'm just a commercial match angler.
But that's another way. I wouldn't recommend that way either.
No, that's.
You've got to. Other things have come in. I've had to do other things and other bits of jobs and work. It's never bother me, and I'm just sort of started and got, I'm going to be a professional fisherman, and had a wonderful financial life out of it.
Because it
It's
has
never
been
going to
hard,
pay you a
hasn't
lot
it?
of money,
Yeah.
and I would imagine the amount of money that you can earn out of it now, apropos to what money fetches now, it's probably far less than it ever was back in. For instance, we mentioned Sir Bob earlier on. I mean, Sir Bob was one of the biggest sort of sponsored anglers in the game. I doubt Bob's on anything like the sort of deals that he used to be, even though he's still out there doing it. I'm not out there doing it.
Yeah.
So we can't use me as a comparison. There isn't. I think partly because there are so many. Partly I found when I started doing stuff in America that, of course, American magazines, they stopped paying you. Because if I was working for Rapala, or Rapala, whichever you like to call it, it's Rapala because it was Larry Rapala who started it.
Right.
Just for the record.
Just to put it in there.
They would expect they're paying me. You're a sponsored angler, you're being paid. So you're being paid to promote your company. So they're going in our company, so why would we be paying you? And then it started to get the same, with anything else, like making videos or whatever else. So that there was a sort of quite a tide changing in that in relatively recent years compared with, when I started, when, some lovely person like John Mitchell at Normark would be paying me, he'd be a jolly good mate, I'd be having a very nice time. I would be getting my expenses, but I'd still get paid by the magazines, and I'd still get paid if I went off and did some, club night or whatever. So I'm not sure that was there anymore. I think one of the things that has changed, and possibly for the better, is we used to have old-fashioned river keepers, and I kind of had a bit of a dream at one point that that's what I'd like to be. Once I got myself out of London and got involved in that world, the first thing I realised was virtually all of them were ex-servicemen. And so my first thought was, well, he's just come out of the army. What does he know about rivers compared to me?
Yeah.
He doesn't, but he's ever so good at getting rid of gypsies.
Right.
Am I allowed to say that? Because there was a lot of poaching in those days. The price of salmon was huge, even the price of trout. Whereas now, because salmon's farmed, it's dirt cheap, and so on. So there's nowhere near so much of that sort of poaching and stuff going on. So I think river protection, which you could almost often say a lot of that early river keeping was about. And then you had people like Frank Sawyer and people like that came along, and even Tom Williams, who I knew. And they changed that. They really had a genuine interest in the river and so on. And now you've got some really great guys. I'll cite one or two. John on Broadlands is a lovely man who's the head keeper on Broadlands now. He's gone to Sparsholt, he's learnt the science, but he's also managed to make sure he spent his time with some of those old keepers, picking up some of the traditions, some of the reasons why things were done the way they were. And you've now got someone like him who's a lovely blend.
He's implementing those things.
Yeah, he's bringing all that together. And runs a wonderful fishery off the back of it, little carp fishery and obviously the River Test. And he's not alone. So I think if you wanted to do something vaguely like I would do, I don't think I'd be looking at the fishing tackle industry or even, I'd be looking much more like going to Sparsholt.
Yeah.
And there's a lot, and Sparsholt's not the only one, it's just the best known one, where you can go off and you can learn all the science of all the rest of it, so you don't go charging off through it with just a load of hearsay.
Yeah.
Because as we've said, particularly in the sort of specimen hunting world, obviously where you can make it up a bit, because I was at the lake on my own the other night and this happened, it gets rid of all that and it actually becomes something real and tangible.
Yeah.
And people will pay you to do it. And then you can decide how much you want to wander in and out of the actual fishing or the fishery. Because trust me, even having a piece of the River Wye, you can end up loving your fish more than your fishermen.
That's easy done though, isn't it?
Yeah.
The future of fishing then, Bob. Are you, obviously this is an interview, sometimes we have to get a little bit political. We have to ask these questions.
I've managed to avoid it so far.
Do you think it's got a bright future, and what concerns you? Obviously, we've lost John Wilson. John Wilson's gone, and John was, towards the end, was quite political about certain aspects of, he thought that the way this country was going in regards to fishing and management. What's your views? Do you think we've got a good future, and like I said, what concerns you going forward?
I think we've already touched on one or two bits of it. I think John was particularly bitter about the state of the rivers in Norfolk. He'd left North London and moved up there for his dream. and to some degree, you could say the same with me. I think I caught the sort of real golden era of the chalk streams in southern England. Most, if not all, of those now are a shadow of their former selves, and I don't see any return from that. But then you've got other places. You've got people. There's a chap who used to write under the name of the Trent Otter, and F.K. Wallace, the famous casting man. He was a Trent man, and they all left the Trent and moved to go and fish the royalty. Well, now they'd all be far better off back up on the Trent.
Yeah.
It's so weird how that has just changed completely. And at the moment, I see more sort of Midlands and sort of North Midlands and up rivers that have improved and fish better than they used to, and more southern rivers that are just disappearing. I think it's two things. A lot of those northern ones is because the industry's gone.
Yep.
And people are now far more aware of that environment, and I don't just mean fishermen. Whereas down the south, we've got more and more and more and more people, which has been as damaging probably as industry was, because they're abstracting more water from the river, so the dilution of what you had in the river is now increased. So that's double whammy. And even, simple places like the Avon Valley, you've now got big retail parks, and you've got commercial parks and industrial parks. All of those have all got all those massive roofs and all that concrete, which water just hits and runs off.
Yeah.
Whereas it used to land on the ground, and used to soak down through the ground, and particularly on the chalk down the south, and it could take up to sometimes some places years for it to percolate down through that chalk and come back up so pure. Well, you're kind of losing that. You can't odds it. It's people. And obviously you've got a massive increase in the number of people who want to use the river.
Yeah.
But that's only one aspect of it. How many people fish rivers compared with the amount of people who fish commercials? I don't know, but I would imagine there's more people fishing commercials than are rivers.
I would definitely say that.
Yeah, by a big margin.
You don't see many of the young superstars coming through today that obviously they are there, thankfully, because that's why we've got the young England team, which have just done brilliant under 25s in the juniors. But it is predominantly a lot of people are going down that commercial route now.
Yeah. And it kind of fits in with the modern world, doesn't it? Partly as I've just said, because the youngsters can go there where they're not going to just be set free on their bike to disappear into the country as I was. So it's changed hugely. I had two guys sat here just recently who've asked me to be the president of a Crucian sort of appreciation society, because Crucian carp have more or less disappeared out of all our ponds and rivers. They want to correct. They are correct, putting that right, not just talking about it. So there's some aspects like that are great. The Avon Roach project, I couldn't possibly let this go by. On my river that as a kid I was just in love with. So those guys have done something about it. They haven't just got, the roach decision turned to pants. They're going, well, why is it turned to pants? So we are starting to see more and more movement like that. And some of it, of course, does get some grant money, to be fair, to consecutive governments, not just one particular government. That there is now far more money for conservation. I think a lot of the time fishing's a bit slow to pick up on that, probably sees itself a bit above it, which it isn't.
Yeah.
Especially now as Joe Public seems to think, rivers are for all, whether you want to go fishing or not.
Yeah.
To be fair to it, I have the canoes coming down here. It makes not a blind difference to the fishing.
It is there to share, isn't it, really? I mean...
Well, yeah, except, because if you're really trying to get me to get political now, aren't you? They don't pay to be there.
Yeah.
I pay a lot of money for this river, and I put a lot of work into it.
Yeah.
They put nothing into it. I have to have a rod licence to even have a rod. They don't have to have a licence to have a canoe. I have to have public liability insurance when I have people down here. They have nothing. It would be nice if some of these other people who are coming into the countryside now could have more involvement in it. Say with the canoes, they could say, well, we're going to have a canoe licence, and all the canoes are going to have a number on. I've got rod licence. If I do something wrong, and one of those canoeists says, well, prove this is me, blah, blah, blah. If they knock one of my blokes over and he drowns, and they carry on panhandling, where's the claim,
It'd be nice if they did do that. But
yeah, it needs a little bit more.
We also, if that's going to happen, then we definitely need push bikes to have a licence as well, because that's one of my pet peeves. But we won't go into that.
You've left the river now. I don't do that bit.
I think so. Like from where I'm from, the Trent there, The stretch that's right by my house, we have a massive problem with jet skis. There's a jet ski park right there, and they are a law
on the river.
On the river,
Right, yeah.
and it's. I mean, obviously, I won't get into it, but it's caused a lot of problems. And the Bird Society, the National Prevention for the Birds.
Which one? The RSPB?
I think it's the RSPB. They've actually done, because we have nesting birds on the banks, and obviously these jet skis cause a lot of trouble. And they have, when there's matches on our stretch, they've done it to me. They'll drive at you and go under your pole, so you have to lift the pole and laugh when they're going past you. And we were actually told on our matches, don't engage with the jet skis because they'll do donuts in your peg.
Yeah.
And that to me is obviously very annoying. But we also have paddle boarders.
Yeah.
And they're fine, because it seems to be a different class of people on that stretch.
I mean, I've got to admit, my first question to you would have to be, so why do you go fishing there?
Because it's fishing, isn't it? And
yeah, but there's other places to go fishing.
Because it's on my doorstep.
There's not jet skis.
And
I don't go fishing.
Oh, no, I don't fish there. I don't fish there. I fished there once with the jet skis, and that was me done. But it's...
but are we arguing about what damage or impact the jet skis or the paddle boards have or on the environment or the fish or us?
Yeah, and that's the thing.
I find it... to start with, I've been here for over 20 years, and there was none of that when I came here, really just about none of it. So I've kind of grown with it. And I find the vast majority of the canoeists, if they see you, they just go over the other side.
Yeah.
But because most fishermen are sat there in their camouflage kit, hidden in the bushes, and then kick off when this canoe suddenly appears. Well, he hasn't seen them.
Yeah.
If I'm sitting there and I can see canoes coming, I'll stand up and I'll just sort of wave to them and give a little gesture, and they go, yeah, all right, and they go over the other side. 99.9% of them. But then equally on top of that, the fish take no notice of it whatsoever.
Yeah.
It made no difference to the fishing.
Interestingly, on that jet ski, I was told about this. It was a qualifier. It was a Rose Bowl qualifier. And I didn't believe it, but they told me as soon as a jet ski goes through, drop your rig in, and off the back of every jet ski, I promise you, I had a roach every time. Yeah. And I don't know if it's because it's a shallow river and it's just turning it up. But it didn't bother them. Obviously, the people bother people because they weren't very civil about it. But no, for me, I do see what you're saying about the river, because we have a lot of problems with litter and poaching where we are, and I think that's going to get worse and worse.
And I'm not, again, how long do you want this to go on for? We could be here for days.
I know. I told you it was going to be political.
Because you get the situations. What are the EA doing now? Well, basically, what the EA are doing is shoving as much off to the Angling Trust, for a fraction it would cost them. Oh, it would cost us this many millions to bailiff the rivers, so we'll offer you a quarter of it and see if you want to do it.
Yeah.
Well, where's all that going to go? We're getting sold down the river on that one.
Yeah, definitely.
Something the sort of Angling Trust, I'm sorry, but it's become a lapdog instead of a watchdog.
Yeah.
And we don't stand up for our rights enough in fishing, in my opinion. We never have.
I don't think you're the only one that's been saying that. You only have to look on Facebook to see what people's views are about that. You're certainly not on your own in regards to that.
No. So, but I think, I suppose, because it doesn't really affect the commercials, they're a separate little state, of their own there. Whereas the guys like me who are fishing the rivers, it does, but we're not really sort of united in any way, are we?
No.
We're all a load of individuals, and we all actually want a bit of a quiet life. So we just let it slide, don't we? We just let it go on by.
And that's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
But thank you for sharing some of it. Like you said, we could have gone on and on about this matter. So we've obviously spoke at length about your life, Bob. What's the plans for the future? Because I've had quite a few people saying, is there a book coming out? And I say book because I'm from Stoke. You'll say book. But
no, that's right. I understood.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'll translate it.
So any plans for any more TV work, anything within the fishing world?
Well, I'm doing some at the moment.
Yeah, well, yeah. Apart from that, there's got to be a book.
I've done the book thing. That's a hard one for me. I'm not. I didn't go to school for a start.
Spent too much
I'm not. I think part of my problem is I've read so many wonderful fishing books in my life. I don't want to write a duff one. So I'm probably setting a standard far too high for myself. And I think it's two different things. If you go back to the HNI, which obviously whatever goes on now or doesn't go on now is irrelevant. but you know, people love to read Chris because he paints pictures, he conjures up images and so on, and does it beautifully. And probably people wouldn't want to read that type of book from me. That's probably not quite what I'm about. I'm not saying what he does isn't real, but I'm much more of a realist. I'm much more out there. You know, people often say that to me, and even when I've done a bit of Facebook, they go, "Oh Christ, we're amazed you're on Facebook." Well, why wouldn't I be? I'm just a bloke who goes fishing. You know, the fact I've been lucky and I've done all these other things in it, I still am, and I think I'm trying to sort of get my head around, you know, what is it people would actually want me to put in a book? And I suppose to some degree, probably what you've come here to try and get out of me is what people would want to put in a book.
And this is a small snippet.
I was going to say, but as you've discovered, that's going to be one hell of a big book.
Just 2 volumes.
and I don't think I could do a fishing book.
Yeah.
Because there's too many other things that have come. Some have come in and out of my life, and some of them connect with my fishing. You know, I said with one particular musician.
Yeah.
You know, I used to know who's unfortunately dead now, and stuff like that. That's to me that's as intricate as how big a carp have you caught. You know?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because you could, like, for example, like Tommy Pickering. He's done a book, Born to Win.
Yeah, Tommy. You know, you see, there's another one. I've known Tommy for years. I've even used Tommy as an example for fishing in my talks.
Have you?
I bet he doesn't realise that. And partly because yeah, absolutely great. I'm pleased about it. He's a lovely fella and a very, very consistent. So consistent, isn't he?
Yeah,
that's the thing about him. But the reason I used to use him in some of the talks I do is because, you know what some fishermen are like. Well, at CT, we can go back to people I know. CT, people say to me, he's a good fisherman. And I go, he's the best fisherman I know. I go, really? I say, yeah. And you can see this sort of looking. I go, his tackle's complete rubbish.
Yeah.
I said,
what about Chris Tarrant and not Tommy Pickering?
yeah. It looks as if someone's gone past in the van and just shoved him and all his stuff out the back as they've gone past to swim. You know, it's just everywhere. And if you want to catch fish, you know, people have done little bits of film with me here. They always say, "You're so efficient. You've got everything where it needs to be. You hardly take up any space." And I go, "Yeah." Tommy Pickering was the one I watched do that. I said, when I used to do talks about fishing and a bit more about how to fish, if you want, I used to say Tommy Pickering sets his fishing tackle up like a drum kit. He knows exactly where everything is. He could close his eyes and do anything that he needs to do on that. I'm sure he could.
He is insane with his prep.
It goes a bit too far.
No, I mean, it works, doesn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
Tommy Pickering once did a video where he walked down, he said he could walk down the back of people and say, "You'll have a bad back, you'll have a bad back, you'll have a bad back." And he's really adamant on it. And it shines through his fishing, though, doesn't he? I mean, that's why he's been...
And I'm the same, man. I'm not one of these people who just puts his rod down over there and this, that. I have to know exactly where it all is. And that's efficient. So I get where the sort of point we're trying to get to with this, really.
Tommy's book, that's what we're coming from.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Tommy's written a book. Yeah,
and that's what I was trying to say. That I think there's definitely something there for that, because it isn't just look at what I've won, because people are aware of what he's done, and it was, this is my life and these are some of my stories. And I think he even says on that this book isn't enough for there's too much.
Let it all out there,
and you've got more. So.
The other problem with me, though, so we've gone past the thing of, would I be trying to set too high a standard for myself? Should I just be telling the stories, not worrying about how fantastic the English was and trying to use words no one else understood, like some people do when they write a book, don't they?
Yeah.
It is how much of it can you do, and you see, if Jane wants something nice written, might it just be in a card for someone? She said, "Oh, could you write that for me? Because she'll do really nice words."
Yeah.
And I go, yeah, of course I will. Leave it there. Well, can't you do it now? No, I can't, because I've got to wait till my head's kind of in that place.
Yeah.
So to write a fishing book with any sort of depth to it, rather than just rabbiting out stories, I think I'd have to go away and hide for months. I don't know how long.
But come on,
because I can't pick those things up and put them down. I couldn't be writing my book and answer the phone and then go back to it. I'd have lost that spell.
Yeah.
And having the memory to remember a lot of it, of course, comes back to me when I sit and talk to somebody like you and I'm doing this.
And
because it all starts to flow back again. So I can only think So what would I do? Spend about a year just writing notes as things popped into my head,
Yeah.
and then try and put those into some semblance of order, and make it
Big
into,
job.
Well, exactly, it's huge.
But don't tease us. Is it going to happen?
I honestly don't know, because part of me, I think I'd like to say, I think part of my ego says, you know, you've done all that. Sure, you want to
Well, why not?
put the record down straight in the record.
Definitely.
You know? And another thing that is quite odd, though, is that I haven't actually got a lot of pictures. And then people love pictures now, don't they?
Well, we'll be showing some of the ones on here from when you were young. And
Yeah, you can put all
We've
the
been
bits
looking up
in
for those.
bits in between. They're quite nice, but they're generally speaking, when people write a book, they have a whole section of when they did this whole section. I don't. My family never really took much in the way of pictures. I've almost certainly caught far more big fish that I've never photographed than big fish that I have.
Yeah.
Because it's never been the goal for me.
Yeah.
I was never a publicity seeker, so I had no reason to want a load of pictures. So the only way around that one for me now would be illustrations, because I actually like illustrated books personally rather more than pictures books that are just full of photographs.
I think that'd be quite fitting as well for like.
I think it might be a bit my character as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, don't give up on it, but
Yeah,
just keep
certainly.
encouraging me.
Certainly, yeah, it certainly needs. You wouldn't the response when I asked people if they had any questions. Quite a lot of the questions, apart from obviously the dogs, were when is he doing a book? So I had to ask you that today.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's a perfectly good question. And in some ways, that's almost an answer. I almost feel like I kind of owe it.
Yeah, you do. I'm just saying you do. Yeah,
Yeah.
people want to see it, so come on, you've got to get it done. So
yeah.
I appreciate that. We've obviously I've had loads of your time here. So I am even though I'm young, I listen to Radio 2, and so obviously I'm sure you're aware of like Desert Island Discs.
Yeah.
So I've got to ask you, if we're going to do a Desert Island Disc kind of thing here, you're allowed to take one bait, one tactic, and one angler. And
so what do they do on Desert Island Discs? You have a record.
Well, you're allowed to take literature, aren't you? A record.
Book.
Yeah.
A book, a record, and some.
Yeah, but obviously that'd be boring for us.
I was just trying to get the comparison
So,
into my head, really.
You've got to have one bait,
Right.
one tactic, and one angler to take with you. And the angler can be past or present. And I can't take multiple answers. It's not like you can't. You've got to give me the one thing that you like to do.
I'm going to be trotting with a 13-foot. Do you want the whole tactic?
Yeah,
I'll be trotting with a 13-foot float rod, a centre-beam reel, a stick float with bread on the end.
Okay, and
that's the first two, isn't it?
Yeah. Who are you taking with you?
Who am I taking with me? Oh, that's just bonkers. That's just crazy, isn't it? Really.
Hey, we're here to push you out your comfort zone. That's what it's about.
Is it? Is it? Does it have to be a fisherman?
Oh, that's,
What is that?
Now you're asking me questions. You can't turn the... Yeah, no, it has to be an angler. It has to
Okay.
be an angler. Because otherwise you'd just say your wife or something, so they can't...
Well,
no.
it might be my fun. I might not say my wife.
No, it's got to be an angler.
Oh, God.
Oh, pressure's on.
I know. I'm stumped on that one, because I sort of flip from people, who Peter Stone was always one of the people who was the most fun to go fishing with. I just loved him. He was just so enthusiastic and full of it. But then I might want to go fishing for the rest of my time with my old schoolmate Graham, because we did all our early fishing together, and now our lives have been apart.
See, that's really nice.
We'd have all that time to
talk about the past and stuff.
Yeah.
No, that's nice. So
I'll go with my old schoolmate.
I'll take that answer. That's a good answer, Bob. So, Bob, it's been fantastic.
Absolute pleasure.
And I just want to say thank you very much for inviting us down here, and I'm really looking forward to, I'm sure people are, to see this one coming out. So.
Good. Well, I hope it goes down all right.
It will, Bob.
I tried not to step out of the comfort zone.
No, you've been brilliant.
And I love it. I mean, I thoroughly enjoy it. I've got to be honest, so thank you.
No, good. Thanks for talking to us about your life and angling, so.
Cup of tea.
Definitely.
Right.